You know what Undertale is. I don't need to explain to you just how popular of a game it is. What you may or may not be aware of, though, is the sheer amount of fan content behind it. There are comic dubs, original animated stories, fan fiction, dirty fan fiction, fan art, dirty fan art, fan-made boss fights, fan-made mods, fan-made music, and finally, fan-made games. Now, when Undertale first came out, I was about 11 years old in 6th grade, and I absolutely adored the game. My first experience with Undertale was through Jacksepticeye's Let's Play, and from there, my interest in the game only grew exponentially. I became so obsessed with all the fan content I just pointed out. I watched the comic dubs religiously, and I adored the alternate universes people came up with, and I watched just about every animation I could get a hold of. I even started wearing my favorite blue jacket and put a lot of my brain power, which isn't much, into making puns and being as laid back as possible. Which was probably the most embarrassing phase I went through. But my point is, I've always been a big fan of Undertale. It's a story I've seen a million times and something I've always been very, very knowledgeable about. I mean, I just love it. It's great. The writing's superb, the characters are amazing, and there is so much to gush about. So, when I heard about a fan game being made named Undertale Yellow, I did not care. Which seems counterintuitive, but I'd seen videos of fan games before, and honestly, they were... I don't want to put anyone down, because the creativity and drive behind making something as detailed as a fan game is worth respecting. But, plain and simple, the quality of the fan games I'd seen weren't up to snuff. They were usually incomplete, and the writing was always a little funky, and they didn't do a great job at matching the tone of the original. I mean, especially when you got into a lot of the alternate universe stuff, or, the fights were just absolutely balls to the walls insane. This stuff right here, it didn't feel too much like Undertale, so I wasn't too much interested in it. And I heard about Undertale Yellow and assumed it was like all the other fan games I had brushed off. The game wasn't out yet and only trailers had been released, and at that point it looked pretty... whatever, I guess. So I just forgot about it for a while, until a couple of months later, the game had come out. And then I forgot about it some more. Then, a few months later, I decided to play it. Since I had heard really good things about it, and it was also a completed, finished experience. Like, this was a full game, something that had a start, a middle, and an end. And I don't think most fan games even made it that far. And oh my god, this game absolutely slaps. I have such a hard time expressing how much I adore it. And since I suck at expressing that, I'm just gonna dissect it like crazy for the next 17 hours or however long this video is. Oh, and also, I'm treating this game as its own separate thing, mostly. This is not a comparison to Undertale. Oh, and double also, you need to go play the game before watching this video. The video is full of spoilers, and you deserve to experience this masterpiece blindly. Alrighty, so Undertale Yellow was created by Master Sword Remix, but also had over 20 people working on it. Which I wanted to point out first and foremost because I think it's really important to draw attention to. One, just because crediting things are important, and two, because Undertale the original was made by Toby Fox and Temmie Chang. So Undertale's 2, compared to Yellow's 20 plus, is important to note when considering the nature of the game. I personally consider it to be a worthy successor to Undertale, and unofficially, officially canonical in my eyes. But I think it's really, really interesting that to properly capture the magic of the original game, it took more than 10 times the people to work on it in order to capture that feeling, while still expanding on it. It makes me think that when you're working on something that is so directly inspired by something else, an original, it's important to keep this 2 versus 20 plus rule in mind. And I don't mean this in like a way that says Toby Fox and Temmie Chang are mad, evil geniuses who can strike gold, while it took 10 times the people to make a proper spin-off. I mean, maybe, but my point is that it took a wide team of people to capture the original 2's vision. It took a lot of work and brain power to emulate this one game's creativity, which I think is a testament to both the dedication and care the developers had for this game. To make a quality fan game, it takes passion, skill, creativity, and love. And to get that many skilled people to come together is a beautiful thing, especially considering this is a free product. That all being said, Undertale Yellow has a lot of key differences in its design. For example, it features all new characters, with very few returning ones. The story is also unique in that it functions both independently and codependently with Undertale. Lastly, I think the focus of these games is their biggest difference. Undertale has you deciding the fate of the underground as a whole, throughout the story and with the choices you make. The entire game puts very dramatic emphasis on how your choices affect the underground's populace, whether positively or negatively. Undertale Yellow takes a much different approach though, and it's one that I like much more. So if Undertale focuses on a much larger setting, I think that Undertale Yellow focuses on a smaller, more character-focused story. I feel that the characters of Undertale Yellow are more defined and have greater capability to change and develop as the story goes on compared to the previous title. Undertale Yellow has a handful of main characters, and they all personify a specific idea or theme. And that idea that they encompass is malleable, yet sturdy at the same time. And through my later analyses, I think you'll see what I mean. But for example, I feel that Ceroba is the manifestation of grief, loss, and love, both versions of it, and how it can manifest in different ways. Or Axis, who's a slave to his programming until it's forcibly disrupted. The way these characters change depending on your actions feels very dramatic, and it carries great depth with it. So what I wonder is if during the creation of the game, they decided to pivot away from the grand idea of deciding the fate of the underground, and more, how can you change these characters' lives? The different routes of the game do a great job of cementing this idea. The Genocide route, which I've seen more aptly named as the Vengeance route, deals a lot with these ideas of revenge, vengeance, and brutality, which, should you follow this route, results in you corrupting a very positive person into feeling those same bitter feelings. Or with Ceroba, you can kill her best friend and see exactly how that grief culminates. Which, don't worry, I will cover all of this extensively further in the video. For now, I just want to lay the groundwork of how I see this game. Hopefully you're coming around to my perspective a bit, that Undertale Yellow is more of a character-driven game versus a grand setting type game. So, with this idea in mind, I would like to introduce to you the structuring of this video. I've said that the game is a more character-driven story, and this video is the exact same way. I wanted to make this video with the main focus being on the characters of the story. I've already written some very large segments on the symbolism behind them, their thoughts and feelings, the way they react to your actions, who they love, who they hate, what they're willing to do for their goals, etc., etc. I'll also be picking apart the music in relation to the previously stated topics, as I believe that each boss theme has very heavy symbolism attached to it. Okay, 2 more quick things I want to say, and then I promise we will genuinely start the video. Undertale Yellow covers much heavier topics than the original game. It deals extensively with feelings of self-doubt, grief, revenge, and a whole slew of emotions that are expressly negative. I want this to serve as both a trigger warning and also as a way of pointing at what this game is trying to say. Undertale Yellow came out 8 years after Undertale did. The people who loved this game in middle school, high school, and maybe even elementary are all grown up now. They've dealt with and experienced pains that the 2015 versions of them might not have dealt with. I believe Undertale Yellow mirrors this growth and maturity that the OG fans have experienced by dealing with much heavier themes. So, let that serve as a foundation for the rest of this video, amongst everything else I've said. Let yourself see this game as a grown-up version of what you've once loved. So, with Dalv, I'm torn between two different ideas. I either don't understand him fully, or he just doesn't have that much to him. He does play a very short part in the game, so that second option is very possible. Regardless, I just want to say that I'm not feeling the most sure on my analysis of him. And I'd say Dalv is the character I'm most open to other ideas with. That being said, here is my 2 cents on the secluded vampire monster residing in the ruins of the ruins. Dalv lives in a self-imposed isolation. His depression prevents him from connecting with those around him, despite them being pretty friendly. Along with that, he seems to be very much in his own head, constantly reflecting on what past events have taken place and stewing in his own loneliness. I've dubbed this chapter an overindulgence of depression, because I think that's exactly what Dalv is doing. He is so laser focused on what's happened to him in the past that he can't see the potential friends and happiness in front of him. He doesn't see how easy it could be to push himself out of this depressive spiral. I think him being the final boss of the ruins is meant to be a strong parallel with Toriel. Both of them are in the ruins for very different reasons, living in a sort of self-imposed isolation. Neither of them are bad, yet both attack you for their own reasons. But neither of them really wants to harm you. They're both just reacting badly to their own trauma and sadness. Plain and simple, Dalv had a bad, traumatic experience with the previous human, who he thinks you are. He also wonders if you've come back to haunt him and torment him, which I think shows that he's aware of the previous human's death at the very least. But he was attacked and it left him scarred and scared. Then when Kaneko stopped leaving him corn, it sent him into even deeper of a depression. And I personally feel that he's overindulged in it a little bit, like he's let it consume him completely, and until you come by, serving as a forceful reminder of his trauma, nothing is going to change with him. As Clover, you have to come by and wake him up, so to speak. And this can be done in one of 2, sort of 3 ways. First of which is you killing him. All this does is reaffirm his fears before ending his life. It's sad, it's bitter, and it gives him no room to grow, but you're proving him right. Another very cruel option is during the Genocide route. Up until his fight, you've been systematically killing everything you can, until you confront him, you fight him, and then you spare him. Interestingly enough, this doesn't end the Genocide route, or vengeance route, I should say. And sparing him isn't a grand positive thing you do, all it does is make him even worse off mentally. It reaffirms his fears and forces him to live with them, sending him even further down his spiral as now he's truly alone in the ruins. Which I think it's really interesting that in the route that requires you to kill everything, Dalv is the one monster you can spare. I kinda like to imagine it as Genocide Clover, seeing the agony this puts Dalv through, and deciding to spare him out of pure anger and frustration. Wishing for Dalv to live the rest of his days in trauma and fear, just like the humans were at the time. And then the last option you have is to just spare him regularly, which gives him a more positive outlook and helps him start the path of recovery. What's interesting is how Clover serves as the catalyst for him either reaffirming his depression, leaving him miserable for the rest of his days, or breaking him out of it, giving him the bravery to join the other characters during the funeral at the end of the Pacifist route. But I think the fact that Clover is the sole person capable of changing Dalv like this kinda justifies my point about Dalv overindulging his depression. It takes the one thing he's most afraid of, the one type of creature that's traumatized him so greatly to break him out of it. What he needed was to be shown kindness by the one thing he fears the most. I guess it's one of the more extreme versions of exposure therapy when you kinda think about it. But anyways, there aren't any other major themes I noticed with Dalv. I see his character as both a representation of those who reside in the ruins, while also serving as a cautionary tale for how easy it is to fall into a depressive spiral after a bad experience. That was such a mouthful. I would really like to hear some other people's interpretations of him, cause, you know, I do feel kinda bad I don't have a whole lot more to say with him. He's pretty cool and has one of the best themes in the game, so there are some major points for that. And speaking of his theme, I honestly don't see how it relates to him. There's not much I can connect between Dalv and his theme, and I think it's because Forlorn, his theme, is more trailer music than it is anything else. It does have an organ, which is a very vampiric instrument, and the way they mix the organ with the typical Undertale 8-bit is amazing. But the theme feels very inspiring, uplifting, and in light of everything I've said about Dalv and how depressed he is, it doesn't really match. I think the theme of Forlorn is more of a be excited for everything that's about to happen versus a metaphorical one about Dalv. Anyways, I don't really have that much more to say about him. I think he's a very interesting but surface level character. I don't have anything I can really extrapolate about with him. He's just depressed, and you either make that worse, kill him, or help him out of depression. There, that's Dalv in a nutshell. I think Flowey is the fundamental problem with immortality. If you look at stories about immortality where someone is in some kind of circumstance where they just can't or won't die, 90% of the time the main character goes kind of bonkers. And I think Flowey is meant to represent this. Before you, the player, came along, he was the main character of Undertale, but he was also trapped in it. I mean, just imagine how you'd react if you were stuck in a world like that. Unable to die, capable of doing almost anything you want. I think given enough time, we'd all end up crazy like that. And every time Flowey resets to try something else, he erodes his already broken mind more and more. So, when the reveal happens that Flowey is more or less behind everything, that he's manipulated your every action just to make your choices work better for him, it's not the most surprising twist if you've played Undertale, but it's still really interesting that this is how he's treated you for God knows how long. And it's pretty in your face too. He doesn't ever really lie to you. He tells you, if you die, I'll reset you. And then he does. He even offers words of encouragement as you go on, but it can get a little less encouraging depending on what's happening. But regardless, the point I'm trying to get across is that when you're trying to understand Flowey, you need to be aware that he isn't tied down to anything. If he doesn't like how something goes, he'll reset it to get his way. Flowey has no real attachment. I mean, he's been alive for God knows how many years, decades, centuries even. Centuries where he's seen every route. He's seen every emotion. All people are predictable entities to him. So all he's left with is a goal, which is to get the human souls. But past that, he doesn't care. Anything between now and then is one of three things: a step in the plan, an obstacle, or entertainment. And I haven't even mentioned his whole inability to feel positive emotions. And I won't lie, I'm kinda unclear on where exactly that line is drawn. He's not emotionless. We know for sure he feels fear, anger, and is obviously determined. So not every single one of those emotions are gone, it just seems to be the more positive ones. I mean, love, kindness, appreciation, empathy, in his mind, all of that gone. Which I wonder if that is because of his weird in-between flower existence. Maybe these emotions are gone completely, maybe they've just been dulled down a little bit. But what I wonder is if through him constantly resetting, toying with people's lives and treating them like experiments and entertainment has dulled him down more than any botched experiment ever could have. I wonder if Flowey has made himself numb through his own actions, and by exploiting reality, he stopped seeing people as people, but more as patterns. If you're constantly resetting people and seeing what they do over and over and over again, they're gonna get very predictable very fast. I mean, if you want to really understand how he's feeling, go watch this video 17 times in a row and you tell me how much you're still enjoying it. But I mean, he knows who's gonna say what, and because of that, they've lost their individuality. He can't get anything new to happen with them, and because of that, he can't get the souls, and he can't form any connections. The point I'm getting at is I'm wondering if Flowey eroded his own brain through his constant use of the power to reset. I'm sure him becoming a flower screwed that up a bit anyways, but I think his extreme apathy and psychotic tendencies are of his own making. So with all this in mind, I think his interactions with Clover become very, very interesting, especially considering he never interacts with anybody else in the story. Or, you know, cough cough, almost nobody. But I think to properly understand Flowey's relationship with Clover, or what he's trying to get out of him, or rather you, I want to set up a timetable. Like a multi-dimensional timetable, or whatever you'd call these resets. First and foremost, Clover comes to the underground, and according to Flowey, gets adopted by Toriel pretty quickly. And so, I want to introduce my Bwaaaah patented flower power chart. And here you'll see something I talked about earlier. Flowey has 3 different approaches to the world around him. Things are either a step in the plan, an obstacle, or entertainment. Clover living a calm, happy life is purely an obstacle. It in no way contributes to Flowey's goal, and it's not very entertaining. So he resets and changes it, pushing Clover to escape the ruins instead. Next would come Clover's attempts at the main Undertale route. And to keep it really simple, he is not that guy, pal. Clover cannot keep up with the main Undertale route. He dies repeatedly, he's not as capable of a fighter, and he's just failing over and over again. So now, Flowey has a new problem. Clover cannot get past the main route. He's not strong enough no matter how Flowey pushes him. And as sadistic as Flowey is, he no doubt found some entertainment in this, but it was also an obstacle. Remember, Flowey wants the human souls for their power. That is his end goal here. So, pushing Clover along, helping him get farther and farther each time, is a vital part of that plan. But Clover just can't do it. He keeps dying. So now, this entire main route, or just the main game, has become an obstacle. And it's one that Clover can't pass, and if Clover can't pass it, Flowey is no closer to getting his souls. So, now we need a new route for Clover, a different way to get him to Asgore, an easier path. And from there, Undertale Yellow was born. Flowey decides to throw Clover off the beaten path as soon as possible. He resets all the way back to Clover's beginning and waits for that perfect chance to separate Clover from all his past failures. He pushes him onto a completely different route. What's interesting is in the beginning of the game, when you fall from the switch, you can try and wait for Toriel, but this is met with an immediate reset when she shows up to save you, forcing you immediately away from her and right onto the path Flowey wants you to take. So I think right here is the point where the game starts. When you boot up the game for the first time is you being put onto this path, after God knows how many resets and changes were made to put you here. And it's interesting how Flowey immediately presents himself as a friend. And when we look at our chart, him introducing himself like such meets all 3 criteria. First of all is a part of the plan. Clover is absolutely incapable of surviving on his own, so Flowey needs to pair up with us/him. And he saves on our behalf so that we can keep on going, even when we die. Second of which, an obstacle. With Flowey directly at our side, resetting as needed, we are capable of clearing any obstacle we come across. Nothing gets in the way as the 2 driving factors here, Clover, with his want for justice, and Flowey, with his want for the souls, are paired together. Clover can build up power, Flowey can keep him going, and it all works out. Now, the last reason Flowey has for doing anything is entertainment. And now, Flowey has a front row seat to everything you do. You can talk to him, you can interact with him, he has perfect opportunities to say whatever he wants to you every time you save, and it's perfect to both keep him interested in what's going on and in the loop. Also, not important, but I think him just chilling here acting like a hat is the most perfect disguise ever is so silly, and I imagine he's only doing it to rock the style. But anyways, we've chatted about Flowey's place in the story, but that's only really half of what's going on here. To really understand him, you need to know what's going on in his head. It's important to understand the psychology behind the crazed Flowey. And while the original Undertale pretty well lines it out between him being stuck in a limbo and being crazy in a weird reincarnation/iteration of Azrael, and him being sad and wanting to see Kara again and blah 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 yada yada yada. I'm gonna guess even people who aren't the biggest fans of Undertale pretty much know what Flowey's whole shtick is. But Undertale Yellow puts a really interesting twist on it, one that runs off of your knowledge from the original Undertale and adds to it. Case in point, the Neutral Route's final boss fight. Flowey serves as our final boss for the Neutral Route. He's the last thing we face as he kills and absorbs us, forcing us into a hellscape of his creation. And we're not locked into a typical fight with him here. Instead, we're dancing around his mindscape as he torments our soul in an effort to make us give in and allow him ultimate control. Having this fight take place inside of Flowey's mind, or his essence, so to speak, is a really good way to let us literally see what's inside his head. It's the closest we'll ever get to being Flowey, and it's a direct connection to his memories, his thoughts, and the way he views himself. The rest of Flowey's chapter will be spent exploring this part of the game, as it pretty much tells you everything you need to know about Flowey, and it's where like 90% of my interpretations come from. So the whole thing gets initiated by Clover accepting Martlet's proposal, which in Flowey's eyes puts Clover right back to square one, living peacefully and not getting anywhere, just like with Toriel. So he kills Martlet, and she dies believing you're the one who did it. And we finally see the real Flowey. The Flowey that is so dumb with everything. The sadistic, megalomaniacal Flowey who has just been stringing you along this entire time. And he laughs at you. He mocks you, and when you try to fight him, he just loads a save, preventing you from even initiating combat. He flexes his power over you, and then he kills you and absorbs your soul. And from here, we get the whole spiel about how he's been manipulating your every action, how nothing you've done is done without his permission, and how easily he changes your actions by a whisper here, a murmur there, all as a way to manipulate you. Oh my god, I got so far in the line. All as a way to manipulate you. He does remark on your resilience and shows you he isn't truly in control of your soul yet, and begins his attempt at beating you into submission. And the way he does is by initiating one of the most creative fights I've ever seen. The fight starts and it's not about dealing damage, it's more of a psychological game. It's all an effort to break you down into giving him your soul. Your UI has turned from yellow to a bleached white, and your text box is displayed with haunting messages. Messages like this. All of these messages speak to this fight's meta nature, as well as pushing Clover more and more into giving up. But I think it means a little more than that. The biggest thing I want you to remember while we're talking about this is that this fight is in Flowey's mind, or his soulscape, whatever you'd want to call it. He controls everything here, but at the same time, he controls everything here. Flowey is absolutely trying to torment you with these different thoughts, these experiences, and the past things he's witnessed. But I think a lot of the messages, or just everything we see here, are involuntary. A lot of the things we witness are thoughts that linger around Flowey's head. The combat dialogue that is just counting, that could be Flowey counting resets, or deaths, or whatever. It's just a little idea I had that everything we're seeing isn't voluntarily put forth by Flowey. A lot of it's probably subconscious. But the rest of the first phase is simple, but breaks the boundaries in a lot of different ways. We see the combat box warp and change depending on the attack, and whatever bosses you've killed this run will show up and attack you, except they're broken down and decayed. A lot of Flowey's attacks also involve self-harm. He tears off his own petals, he attacks his own body, he shatters white souls, which I'm guessing represent his own, and you see these bizarre versions of himself that he throws at you. Between saw blades, weird but kinda realistic side portraits of a person, and this huge attack where you see these white dusty hands that kinda resemble amalgamations, which Flowey does share an origin with. All the while his disturbed face stares back at you, until it all twists and distorts. I think so much of Flowey can be understood from here. He's so tortured, so broken, that even in his own mindscape, all he can throw at you are attacks that show him getting hurt, or him reaching towards his goal. The segments where you're sent running through random areas of both Undertale and Undertale Yellow's maps are interesting too. A lot of it is very familiar and nostalgic even, but in the end it's all just more effort to break Clover down psychologically. Flowey will make you run from ever-encroaching vines, even sending you through areas that you've never technically been to. I mean, Clover just now saw himself get killed here. Just a few minutes ago, he witnessed his own death in these strange places, and Flowey is already making him relive it. We're witnessing a gross amalgamation of Flowey's attempts at tormenting Clover with everything he can, and his own scattered imagination that's filled with violent, self-harming thoughts and distorted feelings towards his goal. It's all such a messy clash of emotion and malice. But eventually you get away, and you find a place to hide deep inside Flowey's subconscious mind. And you get a chance to witness a few of his memories. Memories of him waking up, crying out for his mom and dad, him exploring his newfound power, and of course, the thousands of corpses behind him. Which I think represents every reset he's ever done, whether it be from him dying, an attempt at trying something new, or some other unfathomable reason. But this hallway right here is the deepest look into Flowey we've ever had. Not Asriel, not the god of hyperdeath, Flowey. This is everything Flowey encompasses. This is his nature and his origin. From here on, for a little bit, it's pretty simple. You're meant to think you've escaped while Flowey torments you still, until eventually he captures you. And we really get into the deepest look we've ever had of him. When he does confront you again, this time looming over you as this hung up, dried out husk of a flower, he tries to monologue, to lecture you, to tell you his ideas. He even says he doesn't hate all the time you spent together, but he barely follows this train of thought. He says himself, who cares about all this? And that life is all about the fun, the thrills. And then he tells you that once he takes your soul, he'll kill Asgore and take the souls of the children. And once again, he's sticking to the plan, focusing on what's important. But he still laughs at you, and everything truly becomes unraveled. Immediately, you're in this giant void with only your heart to navigate with. Attacks shoot from the ground and come from every which direction. All the while, Flowey looms over you from above, throwing every random attack he can conceive of at you. He shoots guns at you, which really cements his control over your soul because he's using your weapon. Flowey horses, supporting a very familiar rider, trot across the battlefield, reminding you of who's really in control here. I think in the first phase, Flowey was very uncoordinated. His thoughts were scattered and half-formed, but here, he is in control. He's taken the same position as his Omega Flowey form, and he's controlling every attack and every thought, and his own form represents this. Flowey is held together by a million different vines, and he's literally looking down at you. And if you die in this phase, or any of the following ones, he holds your soul together, preventing it from shattering upon death. The only options you're given are to fight and to dodge. Even when you get a modicum of a choice, it's Flowey grabbing hold of you and twisting you around, forcing you to choose the next phase of the fight. everything in this and the following stages are meant to torment you, or Clover. Not to mention, this is playing in your ears the entire time. This song that is so chaotic and messy and really hammers home just how screwed you are. I genuinely really love this fight. I would put it in like the top 10 video game fights of all time. It captures his character so well, and it has such an ominous yet exciting feeling to it. And you are desperately fighting back against something you could never win against. But this fight has a few other phases too, each bearing their own short song. We'll call them the Specimens, mostly because the tracks are named that, and Flowey is literally a specimen, an experiment. And these Specimen phases deal with Flowey changing his form. He takes on a handful of different looks and attacks you with something that has a theme. For example, he's a big heart in this phase, and you're attacked with blood cells and this little cell bacteria thingy. I don't know what you call them. But I think there's more to this than, oh my god, he looks so creepy! These phases are meant to represent the different parts of Flowey. They kind of represent the different ways he views himself, or the ways he's lived his life. The first of which is called Patchworked, and I want to talk about this one first. I've wondered if this phase represents Flowey in his early days, with the circus music and how he bounces around with the exaggerated swagger of a yellow flower. It gives me a big circus vibe, like he's overacting as a happy, cheerful flower who's just dancing around. The stitched in smile, the button eyes, all of it gives me the feeling of something pretending. I mean, Flowey just on his own is very much like patchworked together, so it could just be really simple symbolism on that front. But I'm kind of imagining that this is what it was like for him before he turned full-blown genocidal maniac. The rusty nails could represent an infection, like his apathy and anger slowly seeping into his being. The music too is haunting, with the screaming interwoven in with the circus music. It's Flowey's theme, but so happy, until the pained screams tear that happy feeling away. I bet this is exactly how Flowey felt when he first came to be, when he tried to exist peacefully, before he turned into the complete maniac he is now. The next one is Organic, and thankfully, this one's a lot more cut and dry. Flowey is an abomination, a soulless creature that's been half reanimated and half created. This weird amalgamation of organs we see stitched together, vaguely resembling a heart, is Flowey's essence given form. The music is a heartbeat monitor, and yells can be heard throughout the song. And there's this almost tapping-like sound from beginning to end. It sounds kinda anxious, like it's awaiting something or trying to get somewhere. Which, knowing Flowey, makes sense. He's always planning something, watching something, trying to understand something. The yells can be his own cries out against his existence. Unable to die and forced to exist, only to feel half the things he should. In part, Flowey is an organic specimen. Okay, so the next one is Specimen Clay. And I have some really exciting but out there theories for it. It'd be really easy to just say, oh, Flowey is clay. He's been molded into this creature. Okay, next. And if you're looking for the quick answer, then yeah, sure, whatever. What I think, though, is that this phase is meant to showcase how meta Flowey is. So many parts of the song and what's going on screen feel so outside of the normal realm of Undertale that it's hard to not see the references. First and foremost, the music. This talking, whatever it's saying, sounds so much like the Jevil voice lines from Deltarune. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but just listen to them side by side. There is a clear resemblance.
Chaos, chaos. I can do anything. Then what?
There's also this laughing sound effect, and there's a few of them that play throughout the song. and they give me big Jonkler vibes. Like it's referencing Flowey's insanity with the Joker's insanity, since it's kind of a similar thing. I guess it really depends on what Joker movie you're watching, but my point is that these things all feel like references, like vague callouts to other forms of media that are reminding you of what Flowey is. Jevel's garbage ramblings are reminiscent of Flowey's purely psychotic rants on kill or be killed. The little Joker laugh could reference Flowey's own unpredictable and psychotic nature. Now, I don't think this idea is very well represented with his battle sprite. Honestly, I don't really know what this is all meant to mean. I think its glossy clay look is very foreign to everything else we've seen. It kind of reminds me of when you're watching a 2D animated show and they suddenly throw a claymation into it. For me, that always throws me off a lot, and it sticks out a ton compared to whatever show's usual style. So maybe this is kind of meant to be a comparison of that, but I really doubt it. Do you want to know what I am sure about though? Pruncel. You probably have no idea whatsoever what that is, so quick explanation. I had a dream I was playing Undertale and I got to the snowy area and it was mostly the same, but Papyrus was replaced with this new character Pruncel. Pruncel's sprite was a high contrast black and white photorealistic eyeball, roughly twice as big as Papyrus and looking directly at the viewer. Whenever Pruncel spoke, the music completely cut out and instead of text, it was an ominous red glow emanating from the text box. For example, one attack that really caught my eye is this one. These eyeballs are flying around and for seemingly no reason. Flowey doesn't have anything to do with eyes. In fact, I can't think of much stuff in Undertale Original or Undertale Yellow that really does. But this weird guy Pruncel or whatever is a semi-popular meme in the Undertale community. It would be the perfect thing to reference if you're trying to make a character feel as meta as possible. So with all this in mind, I think this whole phase is meant to show just how outside the box Flowey is. He can save and reload and bend reality to his will. And the entire game, that's what he's doing to you. He is the fourth wall breaker. I mean, in the original game, he literally smashes through your save file, and I think all these weird half references to different forms of media are meant to showcase his meta nature. Paper is the next phase's name. Have you ever seen that trope in movies and TV shows where someone will write down a letter, like a love note or whatever else, and then they crumple it up in frustration? That's what I think Paper Flowey is. It seems to me that this phase is meant to showcase his past ideas, his past plans, everything he's tried before. He's floated ideas and seen what has and hasn't worked. He has crumpled time and space in an effort to achieve his goals. Plus, he's lived through thousands, if not millions, of timelines over and over and over again in an effort to get what he wants. And look at Flowey himself. His appearance is crumpled and torn. His smile and eyes are empty and are the only pieces of the paper that are outright missing. The music just reaffirms this idea. It's empty. It has random garbage muttering. The quick speech that goes by could be Flowey's own scattered thoughts. Maybe it's how he remembers his plans after having so many of them. Next is Polygonal. This phase is a lot more disturbing visually, and I feel like it's meant to represent how Flowey views the world. A lot of the imagery here is sharp, thorny, and it's way more oppressive and cluttered in this Specimen version compared to the others. This phase feels like a visualizer for his defensive mechanisms to the world around him. I already said it's cluttered, but I think it's really interesting how thorny everything is. It's very prickly and sharp looking. And as the phase goes on, he's keeping up this smile right here. The first thing Flowey does in almost every situation is smile. When he meets you, he smiles. When he kills you, he smiles. When he murders your friend, he smiles. I'm sure he is feeling some real enjoyment and excitement at killing you or your allies, but I think it's worth noting that the first tool he always uses is a smile, and he uses it both offensively and defensively. Another attack I think is really interesting is this little guy that crawls out of him. This little Flowey figure will crawl out from the dancing head and lash out at the world, turning red and disturbed. And I think this is just how Flowey operates. He smiles, he pretends, and he lashes out at the world. He gets angry and furious at interruptions and things not going his way. The way Flowey acts in this phase is exactly how he acts with Clover during the entirety of the game. He's friendly and happy with you, bouncing left and right, but when you step out of line, he lashes out. His thorns show up and his eyes go empty. I think a lot of the symbolism here has to do with how he interacts with the world. And the music, too, is pretty simple. I don't really have a lot to go with there. I think it just fits what I've said already. Okay, Mechanical is next, and then we are done with these Specimen tracks. I know this has gone on a little while, but I think these are important to cover, and they weren't thrown into the game for no reason. They were meant to be dissected. So, Mechanical is obviously mechanical. It's robotic, which could just represent Flowey's lack of feelings toward others summed up perfectly. In this phase, he is always a machine, a weapon that is killing whatever is in its path. Something I noticed with the music is that it sounds like it's almost triumphant. If you compare the guitar riff to that of Remedy, it almost feels the same. Remedy does a good job of feeling big, scary, and strong, but here, it just can't get there. That compared to the constant sounds of gunshots that play in the actual game, and the clashing metal sounds that never quite finish. I mean, look, I've said a million different times now, I think this is how Flowey sees himself, or whatever. But I imagine this is an ideal version of Flowey in Flowey's mind. Flowey is very methodical and patient when he has to be, because he has no other choice, but I wouldn't go so far as to call him mechanical or technical in what he does. He seems emotional, he's quick to anger, and he's very rash. Something else too is we see 3 different main weapons here: bullets, saw blades, and speakers. And if you think about it, these are typically the 3 tools that Flowey employs. The bullets, or friendliness pellets, that annihilate whatever's in his path. The speakers, his voice, which he constantly uses to manipulate and push you along. And lastly, the saw blades. Or I should say, his power to reset. He is constantly cutting through timelines, so, you know, saw blades. It makes sense. So, I think I've proven that each of these Specimen phases gives us more context on Flowey. Something that this game does a great job at, by the way. Good job, you guys. But giving Flowey so much more depth and allowing the players to understand him more is a great way to build on the original game. And it's done very well too, staying very, very close to the original vision. But my point is that Flowey is a fragmented, psychotic, and dangerous individual. I think each Specimen track paired with the other 2 major fight areas you're put in, and their accompanying music shows exactly where Flowey's mind is at during the game. It shows you what he's thinking and how he sees you. I didn't talk a lot about the Best Friends Forever theme that plays during this part, but it plays with Flowey's main, simple theme so well, especially these parts where you're running from his vines. It all clashes together so perfectly. I mean, it's incredible how many songs were made for just this part of the game, and they were all executed perfectly. Through both symbolism and literal ism, and everything else. This fight provided such a golden chance to give us Omega Flowey 2.0 by putting us in his head and giving him ultimate control. It is such a great callback to the first game while still building on his character so much. I really hope that throughout this chunk of the video, you're able to see my perspective on Flowey a little bit better. He's not very sympathetic, at least not compared to Dalv or any of the other characters we're about to cover, but it's still so interesting to see in the mind of someone who's so tormented and evil, and so careless about the lives he destroys to reach his goal. It makes it hard to end this chapter on a very positive note, considering there really isn't anything redeemable about Flowey, but oh well, we can do an abrupt ending. Grief, loss, and love. Both versions of it. I can't think of a better way to summarize Ceroba's character. From the get-go, she's meant to catch your eye. When you're taken into this saloon full of these wacky Wild West characters, there is one person who stands out. One figure who doesn't match the style of everybody else. You see this fox lady. She's dressed in a very fancy-looking Japanese outfit, yet she's lazily leaning against the counter like everybody else in the saloon. There are so many contradictions in this frame alone. First and foremost, she's a visual outlier compared to everybody else. Her clothes are bright and expressive compared to the drab browns and other muted colors everybody else is slathered in. Her little headdress mixed with a kimono type outfit are such outliers compared to the cowboy hats and ponchos/leatherwear that everyone else is wearing. Not to mention how fancy of clothes these are. When you think of a royal, official Japanese figure, you imagine these complex outfits with fanciful headgear and elaborate designs. And Ceroba meets most of these official qualities. She looks like royalty, but she props herself up lazily. Her eyes are half open in the same typically unamused expression you see in just about everybody else. She's leaning against this counter with a single arm, 5 feet away from some passed out drunkard. Her leg-hip area is kind of bent to the side, and I'm not trying to be suggestive or anything here, but look at this posture. One foot stretched farther than the other, hips jutted off to the side. There are so many contradictions here, and it does such a great job at creating a myriad of questions in the player's mind, even amidst the chaos of being lugged over Ed's shoulders and put on center stage. When she's interacting with Starlo's little stand-up routine, this question in your mind of, is she official or is she not, is perpetuated even more. She doesn't really seem that fancy or official, and she's playing along with Starlo's show, asking questions, pointing out flaws in his logic, and she plays more of the straight man to Starlo's act. But none of this screams official. The dialogue you have with her outside the saloon is really interesting to me too. I did not catch this on my first playthrough, or really any of them. I'm actually just thinking of this as I'm writing out this script. But when you're talking to her, Ceroba almost immediately talks about getting you out of here and on the path to the castle. She's presented herself as a way out, which at first I thought, oh yeah, she's cool, glad she's willing to help out. But now I can't help but think about how it's just set up for her to take your soul. And by immediately offering to be your way out, she sort of narrows your view on your options to leave. At first you'd think you just have to free Martlet and then be on your way. But Ceroba seems like a more solid approach to getting out of here. She's buddies with Starlo, she asks how you're doing, showing concern, and she seems like a smart, mature person. Which, when you compare that to Martlet, is an upgrade. And real quick, again, look at her pose during this dialogue. Her body language and her clothing are at complete odds here. Like, I don't know if it's just me, but it's really good writing that they could create this dichotomy between how she sits around and lazes about and how she dresses and appears visually. It could be a way to endear you to her more. Kind of a, I may look big and serious, but I'm chill like that. But what I think more is that it could show where Ceroba's at mentally, which is a thread I want to follow. Once upon a time, Ceroba had it all. A husband, a daughter, a complete family. And it's no doubt that they were a wealthy and loving family. Shujin was a scientist who was fairly successful in his endeavors. I know a lot of his scenes and references include him failing, especially with the Axis robot, but one, the robot did eventually work, and two, if he could afford something like this, then there must be some successes he made too. I assume Ceroba was a stay-at-home mom most of the time, but she was a dedicated mother. Until this family she had built up was slowly ripped away from her, first by her husband's mistakes and then her own. The happiness Ceroba had created for herself has all but crumbled. She's fallen from grace and her appearance reflects this. You get the idea she's a very wealthy, aristocratic woman who has these fancy clothes, but look at this posture. Look at where she spends all her time. She's quite literally slumming around with quote-unquote common folk. We don't see a whole lot of her during the Cowboy Starlo arc since it's mostly focused on him, but when we do eventually venture with her into the Steamworks, we get a lot of perspective on Ceroba. Ceroba still has very motherly instincts as we continue through Steamworks, even though she's leading you to your doom. A lot of her talk gave me the idea of a caring mother, except she's a little out of practice. She talks pretty smoothly to Clover, and while everyone else talks to you on a fairly equal playing field, she does talk down to you. Not in a "I'm better than you" type way, but in a "I am the only adult around and this kid needs a babysitter" type way. A lot of her lines are coarse and a little rough, probably not things you should typically say to a kid, but at the same time she does ask/say valid things. She'll ask you about your parents, then back off when it gets too personal. She mentions how energetic you are while she's completely wiped. She calls you immature in a somewhat kind way. It's really easy to see how motherly she is, especially when she starts talking about Kaneko or her husband Shujin and the plans they once had. I think all these dialogues are very important to have, because they show us where Ceroba's instincts are the entire time, in addition with laying down her backstory for us. You know, it's really interesting too, because Ceroba doesn't hate Clover. I'm sure she even likes the little guy. She has fun with us, compliments us, is willing to equally work with us, and defends us from attacks despite planning to kill us herself down the line. It makes Ceroba pretty sympathetic, and I think it excludes her from a purely villain title. I can't look at Ceroba and say I completely disagree with her choices. At the very least, it's understandable. She's not some mustache-twirling villain who wants to conquer the world. She's just a grieving mother who's lost everything in life. And while you're a part of her plan in restoring just a piece of her family, it isn't done with malice or hate. All of her actions are in the name of love. Love, 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 love. I've mentioned that Ceroba embodies love perfectly. When it comes to her incredible power-up in the Pacifist route, and her still big but not as powerful power-up in the Genocide route, I think it's because of love, or more specifically, level of violence. First, I want to look at her Pacifist fight. The build-up to this fight is huge in establishing Ceroba's familial love and how far she's willing to go for it. She trauma dumps on us a lot in Steamworks, and when we're searching her house, we see even more of what she's been up to / been through. We learn what Shujin was working on and get the full picture, and it isn't hard to figure out what happened to Kaneko from there. Shujin's research didn't reach its end yet, and Kaneko being mentioned as someone to not experiment on with the knowledge of her death is telling. The flashbacks we get later confirm it, but an observant viewer would be able to make the connection. Which is not me. I did not know what the hell was going on when I first played this part, so don't feel bad if you didn't either. But the gist of it is that Shujin more or less killed himself, and Ceroba's killed her own daughter. Ceroba's loving family has been completely fractured, and with no way to continue Shujin's research, she's just kinda stuck. She lives out her days with Starlo, playing along with his childish antics and loafing around the saloon. But when we appear and we're on the Pacifist route, Ceroba finally has a chance. She has said herself that she feels Kaneko's life force out there. So from this point on, there is finally a light at the end of the tunnel. So, with all of this buildup, I really want to talk about the immaculate power-up that love can provide. First of all, there is 2 definitions to love. First is love as in love. It's affection, it's caring for someone, it's being willing to do terrible things for someone. It's just love as we all know it. And then there is your level of violence. As demonstrated by Clover in the Genocide route, your level of violence is just that. It's the amount of violence you're willing to commit for your goals. As we level up in the Genocide route, we're seeing Clover's sense of justice grow stronger and stronger. Him leveling up, that's his level of violence increasing because he's becoming more and more determined to avenge/free the human souls. In this fight, Ceroba follows the exact same logic. It starts off with Ceroba immediately taking out Martlet and and the other one. What I meant to say is that Martlet and Starlo are immediately taken out. And her willingness to assault these 2 innocent people already shows that level of violence, the amount of violence you're willing to commit, has grown for Ceroba. And I do think Ceroba has some skill with magic, but I don't think she's anywhere near the levels of Toriel or Asgore. Again, I think she's pretty adept with magic, as shown in Steamworks. She can shield your heart and block a few attacks here or there, but we never see any big displays of power. And while I don't have any direct proof of this, I don't think she's very capable of using big, explosive, magical abilities. But after having this tense talk with Martlet and Starlo, and telling them to leave, and saying herself that she's too far gone, she is in the prime mindset of kill Clover, save daughter. At this very second, her level of violence has risen, giving her the power to knock out 2 other monsters who aren't exactly weak when it comes to fighting. Then, right before the fight starts, we see this dialogue from Ceroba. But now I must follow through with my mission. That is a very headstrong quote. That shows dedication. It shows a willingness to put morals aside and focus solely on the mission at hand. This is a goal first, feeling second mentality. If there was any type of attitude that would result in an increased level of violence, this would be it. Another line that happens a little bit later in this pre-fight dialogue is this one right here. I have nothing left in life, so I've made peace with throwing it away. This again shows her willingness to commit to the goal at hand. And it shows her escalating attitude and desire to kill you, which in turn is going to increase her level of violence, which, again, gives her a bit more of a power-up. So, while the first phase is pretty tame visually, I do think there are a few messages here and there that seriously reinforce what I've said earlier about the power of love. First of which is what happens when you try to reach out towards Ceroba and get her attention. All you're told is that her gaze is impenetrable, and the fight continues on like nothing happened. It's just more evidence on how laser-focused Ceroba is on killing you, how much she's willing to disregard her own emotions and motherly tendencies, both of which are shown to you when she's caring for you in Steamworks. This, paired with the earlier dialogue about how she must follow through on her mission, shows that she's pushing her feelings aside and focusing solely on her goal, even if that includes killing you and injuring her friends. Another bit of text I want to talk about is this box right here. Ceroba wipes sweat from her brow. I genuinely think this is single-handedly one of the biggest pieces of evidence I have for how your level of violence can bolster your strength. This line alone tells me that Ceroba is putting in maximum effort in killing you. The attacks she's thrown at you have been magical in nature. You don't see much physical movement on her end, and physical movement is really easy to gauge. If she was bouncing around, swinging her staff left and right, I'd very easily excuse this line. But monsters are made of magic, and as such, she's using her essence to fight you. And with how easily she's utilized magic before, it's interesting to see that now she's sweating and she's starting to get exhausted. I could be overreading this, but I think this first phase is Ceroba trying her hardest to beat you down. She's putting in maximum effort to kill you. She's sweating, she's focused, she's at her peak performance here, a performance that is already bolstered by both versions of her love. So when she's still unable to kill you, even though she has such a massive power up, we see this happen. At first, we see anger, an emotion that has been directly correlated with your love increasing. And immediately after that, she's able to box you in and throw attack after attack at you that you have zero chance of dodging. Think of how incredible of an upgrade this is compared to what we just saw a few seconds ago. Think of how much anger, dedication, and drive she's feeling just in this moment alone to bring her from this to this. That is exactly how Undertale's love is meant to work. It's a power-up that comes from your willingness to be violent. The rest of this segment just reaffirms this. She has a little declaration that it's come to this, and she pulls out a mask. This mask lets her distance herself from you, a mask that provides a buffer between you seeing her and her seeing you. It's a way to emotionally retreat, to don a false persona, or create a barrier between your own mental state and the outside world. And right before she dons this mask, she says, for Shujin, for Kaneko, for the future of monster kind. She's quoting her sole sources of inspiration, the main driving forces that have kept her going all this time. To Ceroba, family is everything, so it's only natural that it comes first, but helping all of monster kind is the goal that Shujin passed on to Ceroba. And with this declaration, she gets an immense amount of power. She assumes this drastic, bright new form and sports newly colored attacks in addition to a shield that covers her mask, the sole divider between you and her. Which kind of reaffirms my idea that her mask is a way to distance herself from you. This is kind of a personal example, but I remember in like 2nd grade or something, it was winter, and I showed up to school in a balaclava since it was really cold out. And there was this feeling of separation from everybody else. Not because my identity was hidden or anything, you could still pretty easily tell who I was. But there was this added feeling of being farther away from everybody else. And I think Ceroba is using this feeling as a way to keep her love high, and by extension, her power. The mask lets her emotionally distance herself from Clover, but I think it's also serving as a constant reminder of her goals. I think this theory I have of the mask perpetuating her love is all but proven at the end of the fight, where the second we completely shatter her mask, all of this red and yellow flare disappear pretty quickly. And that's because she's lost her emotional separator and her reminder of what she's fighting for, the things that are directly contributing to her level of violence. And once that level of violence is gone, so is all of this power. The last bit of evidence I have for the Ceroba represents the good and bads of love is the final power-up she goes through after observing her memories of Shujin and Kaneko. We get to see Shujin as he's bedridden and sick, an inch away from death as him and Ceroba share a final tender moment. And we see Ceroba effectively kill her own daughter through shoddy experimentation. These are the two main sources of Ceroba's grief and I'm assuming her most emotional memory of them both. Shujin sitting there sick and dying is probably harder to look at than a casket or a pile of dust. And watching your own daughter crumple because of your mistake is of course gonna linger in your mind. I think the primal scream we see after this, through the remains of her fractured mask, is Ceroba's love at its peak. We've forced her to relive her most tragic memories, and all that's done is reaffirm her of her goals. It's hard to not repeat myself here, but I really want to get my point across that Ceroba is experiencing all of this power solely because of her level of violence and her love for her family. I truly believe that she isn't that exceptional of a fighter otherwise, and while a gifted magic user is nowhere near these levels normally. Ceroba is grief, loss, and love incarnate. She is a mother that is wounded and desperate to get her daughter back and honor her husband's memory by completing his research. She's finally been given this chance through Clover, but otherwise has had no way of pursuing this goal. All she could do is drink and pretend her days away with her best friend. Ceroba is such a tragic character, and it's made even sadder with how she completely gives up in the end, allowing you to kill her and move on. It seems like she wants you to finish her off too, even telling you to give her this. Those are not the words of someone who wants to keep living, and who can really blame her? She's been through hell, and in her own words, put her own family through hell. I don't think she's justified in blaming herself as much as she does. She's just made mistakes, and if you spare her, you help her see the error in her ways, and even slightly recover from these errors. I remember when I finished the game, I was pretty desperate for some fan content, and I ended up looking at the Undertale Yellow subreddit. And if you're in need of some happy motherly moments from Ceroba, there's a lot of comics and these fan-made still things that show Ceroba raising Clover and Kaneko together. I'm sure that's not entirely possible, considering that canonically this is Kaneko, tucking you into bed in the original game. But still, these are happy windows into what could have been, and I think it's important to peer through them, considering just how sad the Ceroba boss fight really is. The Genocide fight follows a lot of the same themes, but for Starlo instead. The Genocide fight is kicked off with you dueling Starlo, and regardless of if you shoot first or not, you do win the fight. But anyways, I think Ceroba is running off the same love versus level of violent power-ups, as I've said before. But this time it's a lot more dialed back, and her magic also functions differently. In this fight, whenever you come into contact with a red attack, your maximum health goes down. Ceroba also doesn't have as immense of a power-up as the Pacifist fight, and I think that's because of the difference in grief between the Pacifist fight and the Genocide fight. In the Pacifist playthrough, Ceroba has had such a long time to dwell on the loss of Shujin and Kaneko, and in addition to that, she's thought about how to properly continue Shujin's research. This has had a lot of time to stew, and she's been coping with this grief for such a long time that her emotional blow-up represented through this primal scream, it makes sense, and it explains how she got such a massive power-up through love. Versus the Genocide fight where she's a lot more dialed back, and I think that again, this is explained through her grief. The fight shows her grief for Starlo's death, but that just happened seconds ago. And while she still is experiencing a level of violence-based power-up, it's different this time. It isn't this explosive, primal display of power that has to be tapped into through a mask or allows her to pull out attacks like this. It's just the ability to reduce your max health. And we could spend another 10-20 minutes going through what exactly this new ability means symbolically, metaphorically, and literally, but I will let you think about the exact implications of what this power means. What I just think is so interesting is how malleable this whole level of violence idea is. It can culminate in dramatically different ways depending on what's actually increasing your level of violence. New grief has different effects than old grief. A desire to avenge her friend culminates differently compared to her desire to save her daughter. It just paves the way for more and more theories. Would Ceroba eventually reach this form in the Genocide run if she was given enough time to process Starlo's death? Or is this a form that's exclusively saved for the sake of her daughter and husband? There's just so much to speculate here. Okay, real quick, I want to touch on the musical themes of Ceroba. I don't have a lot to say with them metaphorically. I think anything I've said so far about the whole love thing could be translated into an interpretation for those themes. So I'm just going to skip over it for the sake of brevity, and so I don't repeat myself for the millionth time. Something these themes do really well is establish Ceroba's Japanese fox girl personification. I don't know a lot of Japanese folklore type stuff, but the kitsune, if I'm pronouncing that right, is a popular figure you see in Japanese media and even in general through various shrines and whatever else they have going on over there. And the music does have a very ancient Japanese vibe, in addition to the slightly mystical tone that the kitsune carries. But her attire is Japanese, her music is very Japanese themed, and maybe her family values are Japanese too. I honestly don't know that much about Japan's culture to give a good explanation here, but I think it's really interesting to point out these comparisons between Ceroba and the typical kitsune figure, just because it's cool. But as for Ceroba, the chapter's concluded. I hope that a lot of this made sense. A lot of it was, how do you say it? Extrapolated. I definitely took that level of violence theme and ran for it for the entirety of this part of the video, but I really hope that you can see where I'm coming from, that this makes sense, and I would love to see maybe opinions that either agree with me or people who think, no, Bwaaaah, that's not at all what I got from Ceroba's character. Of course, with every character, feel free to comment what you think in the comments below. I didn't write a script for this part, but that's it. Chapter's over. How do you react to a hopeless situation? Do you drown your sorrows? Do you try over and over and over again to find that perfect solution? Or do you isolate yourself and stew in your own misery? Or do you pull yourself up by your spurs, don your fancy poncho, and put on the show of a lifetime? Now, this may shock you, but Starlo chose that last option, and we see that play out in the most extreme way. Starlo, or should I say Northstar, is the sheriff of the dunes, and he oversees this small town full of what I would think are happy monsters. But how much law enforcement does he really handle? How much of the law does he really lay down? I think Northstar is more of a jester, a funny man that people laugh at. He's the heart and soul of the dunes, keeping everybody entertained, happy, or annoyed. And all of those feelings are better than the typical apathy that so many monsters fall into. Northstar puts on shows. He comes up with these wacky activities to do with his squad of goons. He does his best to keep things lively. He's fully and wholly dedicated to keeping everybody happy, and when you arrive, it becomes the perfect blanket of excitement that he can keep everybody wrapped up in. And it's interesting because the entire town sees Starlo show up with a human, and they're fine with it. They don't try to kill you or capture you or whatever, except for, you know. But I think that's because of the respect Starlo has gained for keeping everybody happy and entertained. I doubt he has any real credit as a sheriff, but he's done a lot for this town and keeping its mind off of that intense apathy I mentioned before. He is their literal North Star, guiding them to happiness. But Starlo isn't perfect. He does fall too deep into his persona, failing to draw the line between North Star and Starlo. He gets a little too obsessed on this cowboy human that just randomly showed up, and he starts to hyperfixate on Clover, pushing his friends to the side and eventually causing them to abandon him. Even Ceroba, Starlo's lifelong best friend, calls him out on his BS and how this treatment of his posse is unacceptable. When we go to confront Starlo after he runs off, we see his reasoning more explained. I've already mentioned it, but he directly says that he wanted to cheer up the underground, and more specifically his friend Ceroba, to help get her mind off of Kaneko. In his mind, distractions are the best way to keep everybody happy. And this logic makes sense. Sometimes the best way to forget your misery is by watching a movie, playing a game, doing anything that's entertaining and stimulates you. And Starlo is just trying to fill that gap. But at the same time, he represents the nasty side of escapism too. He becomes too enveloped with this fiction he's built around himself. Clover's arrival marks the beginning, or at least the midpoint, of his preoccupation with escapism. He puts you on this pedestal because you're finally something new, something interesting. And he interacts with you, gets you acquainted with the town, he even lets you run free, which shows he's not just trying to entertain himself, he wants you to go and talk with the townsfolk, to make friends with everybody. He wants you to go and be their entertainment, because it gives the people something new to look at, something new to think about, and it's a brand new distraction in the most interesting way possible. But when we meet up again with Starlo, he starts talking about how you're the problem, because how could the great and lovable North Star, sheriff of the people, have something wrong with him? So he places the blame on you, even misremembering what it is that Ed actually said. And then he gets all excited about this idea of power and fame. He realizes that bringing you in would cement his role as sheriff. Maybe it's for his own personal satisfaction, or maybe he sees it as a way to even further help the underground. Regardless, he dives completely into the North Star persona during this dialogue. This shift from goofy cowboy to Wild West, do whatever it takes sheriff, is Starlo fully accepting this persona he's built up for himself. Over time, I think he was convincing himself more and more that he was North Star. Case in point, when he's called by his real name Starlo, he gets mad, frustrated, and annoyed. But this fight marks the point of complete acceptance. And honestly, it's incredible how competent he actually becomes at everything. He traps you, he utilizes creative attacks, and throughout the fight, he speaks in a way that represents a real sheriff. As the fight goes on, his dialogue gets more and more serious, like something you'd really see out of an old western. At first, it's silly. You're in a lasso and he's being such a drama queen, and when you make him shoot his own lasso, he has the audacity to get angry at you despite him trying to kill you. But when you break free, he remarks that at least now it's a fair fight. He starts monologuing about how the role of Monster Kind's hero is one that's soaked in blood. You can see him coming to terms with the reality of his situation, of the entire underground situation. Sure, he's still playing it up as sheriff, but this false reality he's built up for himself has crumpled. He realizes that it can't be all fun and games if the monsters want to escape, and that he has to kill humans to get out of here. It's such an interesting contrast with the beginning of the fight, where he seems more interested in the status and excitement of being a hero. Eventually though, the fight's over, Ceroba comes by and gives the final slap that's needed to wake up Starlo from his delusions. But I think it's really interesting how much Starlo, or rather North Star, represents the tragic reality of the underground. How the only chance they have to escape is to slaughter human children over and over. And sure, they can play around a bit, make light of a bad situation by throwing on some bravado and a fun persona. But you can either cope with things the best you can, or you can hunt down humans and throw mercy to the side. The only way to become a hero in the underground is to become somebody else's villain. Even in the Genocide route, Starlo faces this same kind of character dilemma. He's told to evacuate like everybody else, but he's too dedicated to his role as sheriff. Yet, he doesn't have the guts to actually kill Clover, instead opting for a fake bullet during the duel. Or the duel. But it's the direct opposite of the Pacifist route. Here, he's a nice, happy guy who's pushed himself into being the stereotypical morally gray sheriff. Versus here, he's starting off as the typical sheriff figure, waiting for you so that he can stop you in your tracks, but he just ends up being a big softy who doesn't have the strength required to kill you. But anyways, that's pretty much all I got for Starlo's character. I think it's interesting how he demonstrates the underground's plight so well, and his actions reflect how most monsters are feeling. Everybody is feeling the misery of being trapped here and the hopelessness that follows it. They're forced to try and fight whatever humans they come across, or just make peace with the lives they've found themselves living. From the start, Axis was a failure. He failed to prove his worth to Asgore, he failed to capture the Integrity human, and he fails at stopping you in Steamworks. The result of bad engineering and only being capable of half-successful results, Axis is doomed by his nature. The second he was created, he was put down a path of failure. I know this all sounds very dramatic, and I suppose it kind of is, but I can't think of a reality where Axis wins. In the Pacifist route, you trick him into falling in love with a pile of garbage, and in the Genocide route, he's just obliterated. The only happy ending he can possibly get is in the neutral route, and even then, that reality is doomed to be reset out of existence. I could think of 1,001 different metaphors for what Axis represents. Maybe he represents being born with a disability and the natural disadvantages that puts you at. Or maybe he shows that just because you're in a happy ending doesn't mean you're better off as a person. I just think it's heartbreaking that he's been put into this world as a conscious, living being, but the entire time he's existed it's to others' detriment and/or disappointment. I mean, I really wish I had more to say, more to rant and rave about. And don't get me wrong, I love Axis as a character. He's a blast to get chased by, and so many of his dialogues are hilarious considering the way he's kind of censored by his programming. But even then, that just shows how much autonomy he really lacks. He chases you around Steamworks because his programming tells him to. He can't properly express himself because his programming prohibits foul language. I mean, you trick him into loving a pile of garbage by exploiting his low battery. Maybe I'm kind of over-exaggerating this low battery thing, but it almost feels like you're taking advantage of a brain-dead robot just to get him out of your way. And it's the same with Genocide. All you do is wake him up and then force him to live in fear as he watches you demolish every robot in your path. And when you eventually do fight him, he tries to explain to you that he didn't want to hurt the human that he killed, that it was his programming that forced him to do it. And what does he get for this moment of vulnerability, for this attempt at logic and reason? This. The only time Axis gets a peaceful, non-manipulative resolution is during the neutral route when you spare him. And do you know what that resolution is? It's to live in the Steamworks, a decaying, decrepit factory that's been flooded with coolant and left as a series of empty hallways that malfunctioning robots that are long past their due are forced to wander for eternity. It's a ghost town, and in the only somewhat happy ending, he's stuck there, caring for everybody else, making it as comfortable a home as he can for his brethren. Only for Flowey to come along and reset the whole thing because you weren't a perfect pacifistic child or a genocidal maniac. And look, I'm just gonna be blunt with it, he's screwed. He doesn't get a happy ending. His pacifist ending is absolutely foul. This is not a happy ending no matter who or what you are. Axis essentially went brain dead following a huge loss of power, and we immediately hooked him up with garbage and sent him on his way. Even in his little ending cutscene, he's still hanging out with the thing, which I get, hey, it's cute. We gave him something to care about, but still, it just feels so cruel to do. It was originally an attempt to just make him stop chasing you and Ceroba, but here it's gone on for way too long. A cute, fun minigame that turned into a cruel fate. I don't know if the devs intended this message of Axis gets no happy endings, or that he's doomed no matter what, or whatever you want to call it. And I know I've sounded all worked up, but I do love it when stories don't give you a happy ending, when it shows that life doesn't always have a perfect resolution for you. It's sad, you know, I do think Axis was hilarious comedy-wise. He always had such a dry way of delivering his jokes that weren't jokes to him, but were jokes to us. And the little censoring that I complained about earlier that they do is a cute way to include some cussing into the game without actually including cursing. His character just makes me so sad though. It's a robot that's obtained a form of sentience yet still has all agency ripped away from him. There's no happy endings for Axis like there is everybody else. Even if the monsters reach the surface and make it out of the underground, Axis will still be in Steamworks, rolling around with a garbage bin that has some other crap taped to it. And I don't know. I don't know if he was meant to be this deep of a character, but still, it's just sad, man. The way I see it, Undertale Yellow has 3 different protagonists: Pacifist Clover, Genocide Clover, and Neutral Clover. And I'm not saying this in a kind of metaphysical or just spiritual type way. These are all the exact same person, but the way they respond to the challenges they face are different enough for me to want to label them as different characters. For example, Neutral Route Clover displays a lot of fear and uncertainty, especially during the fight with Flowey at the end of the Neutral Route, versus Pacifist Clover, who stands up directly to Ceroba and is even willing to spare her and sacrifice himself for the future of monster kind. But I do hear you saying, what about in the Pacifist route when you kill Ceroba? Is that still quote-unquote Pacifist Clover? And honestly, I'd say no. I think the second Clover decides to take a life, artificial or otherwise, he is no longer that pure pacifistic version of himself, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. First and foremost, I would like to talk about Neutral Clover's character, because I do think it's the most realistic depiction of how a child would actually act in the underground. Of course, who you kill and spare is completely up to you. And because of that, it's harder to really pin down what this version of Clover is thinking. But honestly, I just see him as a kid, a scared kid who's lashing out at whatever frightens him. If you put any 8 to 12-year-old in this situation and give him the tools to defend himself, then you're gonna see some casualties. But at the same time, that child is also gonna show kindness to the monsters that are less hostile or friendly with him. Again, how you play the neutral route is completely up to you, and it's really hard to give this scared child idea any real credibility until the actual end of it. I think this final confrontation with Martlet and Flowey are the key points that show just how out of his element Clover is. And it all starts with Martlet's proposal to adopt you. Something I thought was really interesting about this is that Clover doesn't turn down Martlet here. All of the dialogue options you're given result in Martlet saying, okay, we're cool roommates now. And as she slowly walks towards you, Clover makes no effort to back away or defend himself, because he doesn't want to keep fighting. He doesn't want to keep convincing monsters to spare him, and he doesn't want to be hunted down and killed. Martlet is offering a peaceful resolution regardless of the choices you've made, and Clover accepts this because in this route he's just a scared kid. Once Flowey initiates everything, we see this idea of Clover being a scared child played out even more. Unlike the other two routes, Clover doesn't have the willpower to tap into his soul magic thing that allows him to shoot and dodge. Flowey forces you into it because 1, he has control of your soul, and 2, Clover never had the emotional strength to push himself into that position. Sure, he's willing to try and initiate the fight with Flowey, but even then Flowey just resets him out of it. In the Pacifist and Genocide pre-fight dialogue thing, Clover shows a lot more bravery in the face of danger. Here he's aiming his gun at Martlet, already preparing himself for the battle to come. While here, he's sitting here, staring down Ceroba as she makes her final declaration. But here, Clover is shaking, he's scared, he's powerless, and he realizes that Flowey just killed his one chance at peace, and now he's coming for Clover. I think so much of this pre-fight event does a great job at showing just how out of his depth Neutral Clover is. I see this version of him right here as a child who got way in over his head and is now just trying to survive. I think when Clover kills Ceroba in the Pacifist run, or just flat out aborts the Genocide run, he falls back into this scared child mentality. In the neutral pacifist ending, that's what I'm going to call this one, Clover exhibits the same fear with Asgore as he does with Flowey in the regular neutral ending. And when it comes time to fight him, he just freezes up and never throws any actual attacks at Asgore, the same way he does when these friendliness pellets start circling in on him. And again, I feel like I've said this a million times by now, this neutral version of Clover is just a scared child who's in too deep, who's flailing around in the water trying to keep himself from drowning. I think that's why he's so quick to accept Toriel as a mother figure in the now erased timelines that Flowey shows us, or why he accepts Martlet's proposal, or at the very least doesn't decline it. And I think a lot of this passive acceptance and / or indifference is why Flowey gets so fed up with Clover too. He needs Clover to be dedicated and driven in his goal, because a scared, undecided child isn't going to get Flowey his souls. And I think when you have all of this in mind, it's really easy to start piecing together Clover's backstory and why he's come to the Underground in the first place. There's a few hints here and there in the story that imply that Clover did not have a good home life on the surface. In the Feisty Five's house, you see this text box that says, "The cramped living conditions bring back unpleasant memories." And when Ceroba brings up your parents, she immediately backs down, apologizing for getting too personal with it, which seems to me like Clover made some sort of face or got visibly uncomfortable at this comment. Which of course, Ceroba's an experienced mother. She's gonna pick up on that type of body language very quickly. So I'm thinking Clover came down to the Underground in search of the missing humans for one of two reasons. The first could be as a way to get away from his folks and potentially come back with a prize that would make them love him or give him better living conditions. Or it's a childish fantasy of being a hero that got way out of hand. There is scientific evidence of people, kids especially, living out a fantasy so they can escape whatever trauma is going on. I'm not a psychologist or anything even close to it, but I'm sure you have a general idea of what I'm talking about, and maybe you've even done it yourself. But I think Clover could have been doing this exact thing, by putting himself in the shoes of a bounty hunter, cowboy, sheriff, or whatever, in search of the missing children. But this attempt at escapism just puts him in an even more deadly situation, and the neutral route is him not quite overcoming that trauma. It's him bouncing back and forth between a rootin' tootin' cowboy and a child that's lashing out for the sake of survival. That's how I see Clover in the neutral route, and of course a lot of this is theory. We don't know exactly what these dialogues imply, and we don't know exactly what Clover is thinking every step of the way either. But if you were to try and piece together some sort of narrative for neutral Clover, I think you'd end up at the same conclusions that I did, or most of the same conclusions. Now, I find the pacifist version of Clover to include a lot less guessing as the neutral one. Here, I think it's way more cut and dry as to what Clover's thinking. Like with every other route, he comes to the Underground in search of the human souls, wanting to get justice for them, except this time, Clover finds beauty in the Underground. Maybe Toriel's immediate kindness was enough to inspire him to act much of the same way. If my previous theory about Clover not having the best parental figures is true, then Toriel would be massively influential in his view of the monsters in the Underground. But regardless, this is a version of Clover that never kills any monsters, a version of him that diffuses every situation and approaches all of monster kind with kindness and consideration. Throughout the game, we constantly get opportunities to be kind to each character. We answer Martlet's little questionnaire about how good of a performance she did, in which we can either choose to be kind and somewhat exaggerate her job performance, if we're being honest, or we can actually be honest and be a little mean. But I don't see any of the meaner options presented as malicious. I get the idea that Clover just wants to be honest with Martlet about his experience. But then it's on to the dunes, where we play along with Starlo as a rootin' tootin' cowboy. Again, something I imagine that Clover absolutely adores. He gets to participate in duels, he gets to save the townsfolk while also solving a very intricate moral question, and even gets to shoot a real gun with his cowboy mentor. which is incredibly dangerous, but still, a cowboy-obsessed kid is absolutely gonna eat that up. We also travel through Steamworks with Ceroba, offering her company, listening to her problems, and handle things in such a mature, merciful way that later Ceroba will remark that because of your time together in Steamworks, she respects the hell out of you. And this is because Clover never kills any robots, displaying mercy to those who aren't even sentient enough to appreciate it. He spares Axis per Ceroba's request, and probably just because he's a good kid. And with the final fight you have with Ceroba, Clover never tries to hurt her. Sure, he shoots his little heart magic, but it's not so he can decrease her HP, he's aiming for her mask. He's trying to get through to Ceroba and force her to stop this senseless rampage. When he does finally wear Ceroba down, he spares her, he hugs her, forgiving her for her attempt at killing him, and then what does he do? He gives her his soul, knowing that this time Ceroba will use it for the right reasons. He realizes that monster kind is a beautiful group of creatures that deserve a chance at freedom. He's willing to sacrifice himself so that these creatures can have the justice they deserve. And that justice is to be free and escape this place that they've been confined to for who knows how long. Probably the monsters. I'm sure they know how long it's been, but you know, you get my point. But anyways, Clover is absolutely an avatar of justice in the Pacifist playthrough, and he displays that by getting justice for monster kind. He comes along, helps them cope with their problems best he can, and he displays kindness to every single monster he comes across. If I were to really make up some theories for what Clover's thinking, my best guess is that Toriel inspired him to make these kind of choices. If we're to assume that the humans are taught about the war, and how the monsters were banished to the underground, then it's pretty safe to say that he had a negative idea of them to begin with. After all, history is written by the victors, and if the humans were so quick to lock them up deep beneath the surface, then it's safe to say that there is some bias against them that would be taught in schools. So imagine Clover's shock when he meets Toriel, who immediately saves him from getting beaten up by this frog creature, and is kinder to him than his own parents. Again, assuming these dialogues mean what I think they mean. I honestly think Clover saw this kindness from Toriel, and while the experience was extremely short-lived, it inspired him to approach the underground with a gentler attitude, to help instead of harm, to display mercy where others might choose violence. He solves the monster's problems as they pop up. He plays along when he needs to, and he gives up his life so that these gentle, kind creatures have a better chance at their own lives. The pacifist version of Clover is a kind soul that started off seeking justice for the human souls, wherever they might have been, but quickly realized there was a greater cause at play here. There was a much larger, worse off group of creatures that needed justice more, that deserved to be given that form of justice due to the circumstances they've been forced into. So Clover does exactly that. He gives up his soul not out of fear or a lack of will, but because he thinks it would be best put to use giving the monsters the justice they deserve. Genocide Clover is the ugly side of justice, the side of justice that is angry, cruel, and merciless, the side of justice that plays judge, jury, and executioner, the side of justice that is more akin to revenge rather than fairness. But it is still justice, and in a weird, roundabout way, it is still somewhat fair. But let's start at the beginning. It is my belief that the second Flowey tells Clover that Asgore killed the other humans, it starts this chain reaction in Clover's mind. I don't think this immediately triggers a genocidal "kill all monsters" reaction in Clover, but upon hearing that all of the humans that came here have died, and then a room or two later Clover gets attacked, it's not at all unreasonable to assume he'd kill the monsters as quick as he can. It's self-defense at first, but it escalates. Imagine how frustrated you'd be in Clover's shoes. Not only are the humans you came to save dead, but now everything else is trying to kill you too. All the monsters in the ruins attack you on sight, so it makes sense that with each encounter, Clover would get more and more fed up, until it gets to the point where he starts to systematically kill everything he can. He's giving in to that genocidal mindset, and I found out how to pinpoint the exact moment he starts feeling that anger, that drive for justice. Enemy retreating is what I consider to be Clover's Genocide theme, and it starts playing when there are exactly 7 enemies left in the area. It's actually what you're listening to right now. And I gotta say, this song is triumphant. It's exciting. It feels like something that'd play in the final battle of an anime in a classic hero versus villain type scene. It feels headstrong, like you're making progress in your goal. And not to mention, it's just fun to listen to. Someone is absolutely going ham in FL Studio as this plays out, and it serves as excellent BGM as you kill whatever monster initiated the encounter. And then you're attacked once again, and this time the same song is playing, but it's slower. It's still exciting, but it feels a little different. It's easier to pick out the notes this time, and it almost makes you think more about what you're doing. Like the slower pace of the song forces you to consider what you've done in greater detail. But during all this talk, we've dwindled down this monster's health, and like all the others, it vanishes in a cloud of dust. And then there's another, and this time it echoes slightly. The notes that play in the beginning almost ring out in a somber, hollow tone. If you've taken the time to listen to the 2 tracks that played before this, then you know what notes are coming, just like you know exactly what attacks this monster is throwing at you. But now that monster's dead, and that empty feeling slowly creeps in as the music cuts out, and the monster disappears in a cloud of dust, just like all the other ones before it. Now it's just sluggish. You fought this monster before, you know its patterns, you know how it'll attack, and you know exactly what to expect from the song that's playing. Does it still sound a little triumphant? Yeah, it does. You're still on the path of justice. You're on your way to freeing the human souls and leaving the underground with righteous justice having been delivered. And with this goal in mind, you keep fighting. You keep hearing that music play in your head. That music that is slowed considerably with each monster you kill, yet still sings to your triumph, even if it started to falter. You've been walking in circles for a while now, farming encounters, listening to your song of vengeance and justice slow more and more. You've been here before, waiting for the next monster to attack you, and sure enough it does. And it's easy, predictably and comically easy. The song has slowed considerably, but your ability to dispatch the monster in front of you has become more efficient. You have an easier time landing your shots compared to before, and you know exactly how the monster will look like after you fire that first shot, the way its form will falter, the way it'll start to fall apart, and when you deliver that final hit, the song will cut out, and the monster will fade to ash, just like it did before. And again, you walk in circles, you get attacked, you aim your gun, 2 bullets are fired, the first weakens them while the second kills them. The music is hauntingly slow, each note echoing around like an ancient alarm brought back online after years of inactivity, or like the echo that follows each gunshot, reverberating through the underground, signaling to all that yet another monster has fallen to you, another casualty in your war for vengeance. This is your only goal, your mission. There is only justice to be served, vengeance to be wrought. The alarm rings out, warning all of monster kind of just what their murderous ways have brought them, only to be followed by the loud crack of a gunshot, ringing out against the underground before the monster in front of you even has time to fall apart like all the other ones do. The only thing that matters now is your goal. There's no mercy to be given, no words to be spared. You'll just keep getting attacked, and you'll keep attacking in turn, over and over again until monster kind has learned its place. Until every monster that blocks your path has fallen, or until every enemy has retreated. Get it? Like enemy retreating, every monster is retreated. You get it, you know, it's very clever. But this song and its many variations are Clover's vengeance given form. It shows the brutal naivete of Clover with how the song starts, in its excited and fun state. At first, Clover is goal-oriented but still pumped. He does get to be the cowboy that is bringing justice to monster kind. But with each kill, with each monster that falls, that naivete crumbles into the more depressing reality of what's going on. The song sounds less and less triumphant because what you're doing has fallen from a justified goal to just plain murder. You don't deserve a triumphant song for as long as you're running in circles, farming encounters just for the chance of getting attacked, so that you can slam your angry hands down on your revolver and enact the justice that Clover has convinced himself is necessary. Until this is all you're left with, because all you've done is provoke these different monsters into fighting you so that you can unleash your fury upon them. And with each kill, your cruelty only grows. Your level of violence grows as you kill more and more, until there are no more monsters to provoke. Now, I'd like to talk more about the difference in the areas as you progress. While the song is actually named Enemy Retreating, you'll find that most monsters have run as you progress through each area. The Snowden Resort place is mostly empty aside from a few of the singers, and most of the areas you typically expect to be populated aren't. Honestly, this route is incredibly lonely. You usually only ever have Flowey to give you advice, and most of the time he's either egging you on or advising caution. Most of the monsters that you've grown to love and respect in the past playthroughs are distant with you. They attack you, and usually the fights you have with them are completely different. El Balador, however you say it, comes to mind specifically. The pacifist and neutral versions of his fight have you playing a fun little rhythm game, and it's assumed that you're dancing along to his beat. But in Genocide, you just don't participate. The fight is easy as you can just stand there above any attacks, and you slowly chip away at his attitude until he lets you just finish him off, believing that his dream of bringing joy and dance and excitement to the underground is completely pointless. So many encounters during the Genocide route are like this. They're empty and lack any real excitement. The dunes is empty, and the town is really quick to get through, provided you don't take very long to kill Ceroba. Steamworks does have a fun gimmick with how your role with Axis is completely reversed, having you chase him through the facility instead of him chasing you. The moment where he escapes through the floor hatch does such a good job at showcasing how the tables have turned, since in the Pacifist playthrough he uses it to trap you and Ceroba, versus here it's a quick, hasty escape from the maniac Clover has become. I also very much like how as the Genocide run progresses, Clover gets a kind of superiority complex with Flowey. At first, Flowey's just kind of there, traveling alongside you, airing his thoughts whenever he feels it necessary. But once you enter Steamworks, you can feel the dynamic change. You start bossing him around, ignoring him, and ultimately pissing him off. Even going so you know what I mean? Even going so far as to threaten him. I think Steamworks is the boiling point for Clover in a lot of ways. His choice to actively hunt down the robots is a strange one, but considering the hate he must be feeling, it makes sense, as Clover carries huge amounts of resentment for monster kind, and these robots are extensions of the monsters. It'd be easier to just ignore Axis and the other robots, but Clover's choice to hunt them down reflects his drive for justice. But when things really kick off is when Axis reveals that he killed one of the previous humans. We see this immense power-up from Clover. We see his level of violence rise to such a point that it gives him this incredible power-up. A power-up that we only see during the final bosses of the Pacifist and neutral routes. But getting it all the way in Steamworks feels so early, and I think it's meant to show just how powerful Clover is, and more importantly, how entrenched in his ideology of justice he's become. I know there aren't any more fights after we get this power-up, but still, for Clover to access this soul magic thing so early shows how dedicated he is to avenging the human souls, how much of a one-track mind he has with it. But from here on, we go and fight Martlet, which I'm gonna talk more about later. And after we've beaten her down, we get this final interaction from Flowey, where he realizes that he doesn't hold any power over us anymore, where Clover has become so determined that he's able to use the power of saving and reloading. And then he throws a torrent of angry words at us, showing Clover what he really thinks of him, but Clover just kills him like he's done with everybody else that ever got in his way. And I think it's really interesting that Clover doesn't reload over and over again to kill him or torment Flowey in any other way. He just shoots him dead and moves on. It's the same when you confront Asgore. You think it's going to be a big fight, but Asgore doesn't even stand a chance. You pretty instantly vaporize him. Then you free the human souls and you walk out of the underground. Then boom! Game over. And something I realized about the Genocide run is, as bad and terrible for monsters as it is, it's not the worst it could be. If you compare this ending with Undertale's different endings, you realize that this path of genocide you go down with Clover is really just a bad neutral ending for Undertale. Like, I think you can leave the underground in almost exactly the same state in the original Undertale. If you just kill enough random monsters, leave the bosses alive, then kill Asgore and take the souls. And this made me think about the real differences between Frisk and Clover when it comes to their genocidal tendencies. Frisk, of course, can reset from the get-go, so it's just a game to them. There's no real challenge, it's all just to see what's the most interesting. And Frisk going down the genocide route is them just playing out the what-if scenario of killing everybody. But for Clover, it's completely different. Clover is a man with a mission. He came here to find the humans, and he leaves with the humans. But at the same time, Clover doesn't display as many completely evil tendencies as Frisk can. Think of the duel with Starlo, and how you can play that completely honorably if you so choose. Or the first fight with Martlet and how you let her walk away when she surrenders. And when she confronts you later about changing your ways, you do threaten her, but when she backs off, Clover lets her go. And again, before the final fight, Clover gives Martlet time to talk and time to power up. Clover does display some kind of honor, and I think that's the main separator between him and Frisk. Frisk is a kid who's playing around with time and space, not treating anything too seriously because it can all be reset and fixed, but Clover doesn't have that luxury. As far as he knows, everything is happening for the first time ever, except in the final genocide fight with Martlet, since I'm pretty sure Clover is the one reloading to the start of the fight every time you die. But multiple times throughout the story, Clover plays it honorably, and I think the fact that the genocide ending really is just a bad neutral ending shows that Clover isn't some completely evil James Bond type villain who is hell-bent on destroying the world. Clover is simply seeking justice for the human souls, and every monster that chooses to fight him is cementing their fates. I honestly think that if the monsters just ignored him and let him take the souls, they wouldn't have as many casualties, if any at all. I guess it just shows how goal-oriented Clover really is, and how he isn't a cruel kid playing around with space and time, but just someone who's on a mission. And that mission can go one of three ways. It can succeed, it can find new meaning, or it can just fall apart. Clover is meant to be the soul of justice, and I think in the pacifist and genocide routes, he really does represent the two opposite ends of justice, the cold, unfeeling kind and the warm, loving kind. Even with Clover's limited interaction with the other characters, since again he's a stand-in for you, the creators still did such an amazing job at giving the little dude so much character. And by the way, Clover isn't confirmed as a guy. I've just had a hard time seeing him as anything else, so I've been rolling with the idea that Clover's a dude, one for the bros. But it's completely up to the player, or you, on how they interpret Clover's gender. But anyways, after all that, that's it for Clover. I think I made some very strong points for what his thought processes are for each route. But honestly, he is one of the characters I'd be most interested in hearing your perspective on. Seriously, please comment your interpretations of what he's thinking, what he's feeling, what you agree, what you disagree with. It'd just be cool to see some feedback on it, I guess. Now, if you're a very observant viewer, then you'll have noticed that there's one character we haven't quite covered yet. A character that I absolutely adore. A character that I am so excited to yap about for way longer than I should. And that character is El Balador. Just kidding, it's obviously Martlet. Martlet is by far the best character in Undertale Yellow. I adored her from start to finish, and I couldn't help but platonically fall in love with her. So, when you face Martlet at the end of the Genocide route, one of the text boxes that appear label her as the zenith of monster kind. And if you look up what zenith means on Google, you're met with a few different definitions. First of which is when something is at its most powerful. It's a really simple definition, but very applicable here. Martlet is no doubt the most powerful monster in the underground at this very moment. Another definition I think is really interesting is this one. The point in the sky or celestial sphere directly above an observer. Obviously, this is because Martlet is flying above you. She's that literal object in the sky hovering above Clover. So, zenith is essentially the high point of something, both metaphorically with Martlet being the zenith of monster kind, and literally with her flying around above you. But I don't think the word zenith is only applicable in this fight. To me, Martlet is the representation of everything that is good and just in the underground. She is the manifestation of the entirety of monster kind purely because of how kind she is, but also because she's willing to adapt. In the Pacifist playthrough, Martlet is a complete sweetheart the entire time, but she's not perfect. She has character flaws, she's unsure, she lacks self-confidence, and she's only willing to fight and kill you in the Genocide route. You can have the bloodiest neutral route possible, but as long as you spare one monster, as long as there is a glimmer of innocence, kindness, and mercy inside Clover's eyes, she offers to adopt you. In both Undertale and Undertale Yellow, monster kind is constantly proven to be an extremely nice group of creatures. It seems to me that they only become violent as a last resort, and even then, a lot of them don't even view battles as a full-on fight. A lot of the time that you're quote-unquote fighting, it's for a really silly reason. Think about the battle with Papyrus and Mettaton. Mettaton is kinda trying to kill you, sure, but at the same time, he's running a kinda show concert thing, and Papyrus is just Papyrus. Even when he lowers your HP, he just throws you in a barn and calls it a day. The monsters are generally kind and usually lack malicious intent. Most of the time, they're violent because of the circumstances they've been forced into. Undyne, Asgore, Starlo, Ceroba, even Toriel. They all attack you because of the position that humanity put them into. If they weren't stuck underground in the first place, then none of this would be necessary. But I bring this up because Martlet's the exact same way. Fighting you, killing you, injecting herself with determination, all of that is a last resort. If it wasn't the only way she could stop you, then she wouldn't do any of this. In a lot of ways, Martlet is the zenith of the underground because she represents the good side of monster kind. The willingness to do what's necessary, but also the relentless kindness that she shows Clover time and time again. Even on a smaller scale, I love Martlet so much. Let's ignore all the grand ideas and metaphors we can apply to Martlet and just appreciate the small details for a while. I think what really makes Martlet my favorite is just how real she is. She doesn't have some big grand goal, at least not at first. She's scatterbrained, she has hobbies, and the way she responds to Clover is both pretty relatable to me and it's just honest. Think of all the other characters, Dalv, Starlo, Ceroba. When you interact with them, they're usually going through something or keeping up some sort of persona. There's just this feeling of these guys are perpetuating a situation. How they're acting now isn't their completely truthful selves. Dalv is depressed, Ceroba wants to kill ya, and Starlo is a professional LARPer. But from the get-go, Martlet is really chill with you. She's completely honest and she feels like someone you could meet on the street. A lot of her dialogue is just so funny too. I absolutely adore how she's this bundle of anxiety and excitement, and you see those emotions constantly clash together during her fight. It's this jumble of her trying to keep things interesting for Clover, while at the same time sticking to her protocol, while still ranting excitedly about different things she's encountered or ways she feels, while also being very, very nervous at you breaking said protocol, since according to her little book, you should be attacking her right now. And then when you have to insult her, she acts exactly like anyone would at a child trying to insult them. Clover calls her a weenie, in which case Martlet just laughs at him, but then Clover insults her clothes, and she does laugh it off, but it's quickly followed up by a "Well, I did spend all night making these." And then her final dialogue brings her to reality. She realizes that this fight isn't going anywhere. The protocol isn't working out, and it's time to come up with a new plan. And unlike certain characters, this plan has no backstabbing, no betrayal, no secrets, nothing like that attached to it. She says that she's gonna get you to Asgore, convince him to let you go because you're such a cutie, and that is exactly what she tries to do in the neutral pacifist route. From the get-go, she's just a good-natured bird who's willing to help, but isn't completely perfect either. That is the usual complaint I have for characters like Martlet. Usually they're kinda perfect and don't mess up often. Like, Martlet is a really good-natured character, but when you think about it, she does not help out that much. Her boat plan fails, whatever this is absolutely fails, and she takes forever to catch up with you when you guys get separated again. Then, when you're gonna go into Steamworks, she ditches you again. I know it's out of obligation for her job and all, but still, she's not very good at playing bodyguard. But that's why I like her so much. She is an incredibly imperfect character who is a complete bird brain, pun intended, and a lot of what she does doesn't completely work out, but her reasoning always makes sense. Her choice to become a royal guard is another example of how real she is. She says herself that she's only in it for the benefits. I think she said something along the lines of getting cheap movie tickets, an insurance plan, and cool royal guard clothes. Which I'm pretty sure she didn't even want the job in the first place, since with Shujin she talks about getting the job as having finally caved. And I'm sure a lot of it is played for comedy, but it's also such a great way to characterize someone. Especially if you're doing a pacifist or neutral run first, since those routes do a really good job at framing Martlet as someone who doesn't get much stuff done, and is also pretty lazy. But something else I found amazing about Martlet is how much she really steps it up when it's necessary. When it's a genocide run, she is on the front lines evacuating the monsters, and when she realizes you're the human that's terrorizing everyone, she puts her full effort into attacking you. But before you provoke her, she just assumes you're another refugee. She's willing to break the rules to bring you somewhere safe, and during the fight, if you choose to apologize, she'll spare you, but not before telling you that what you did is wrong. She questions if you even deserve forgiveness, but still she realizes that at this point, apologizing is all you can really do. She is willing to accept your apology, but it still leaves her unsure on what exactly she should do. It shows how Martlet is a very, very, very kind bird, and has almost unlimited sympathy for anyone and anything, provided they deserve it. So let's pause and think about that. You, Clover, at this point have killed a couple dozen monsters, right? There's a couple dozen lives that are gone forever. Family members that have been erased. Fathers, brothers, sisters, mothers, all gone. You have taken the lives of quite a few monsters, but still, apologizing to Martlet, expressing remorse, and showing regret is enough for her to spare you. For her to want to give you a second chance at being a good person. Tell me that that isn't the epitome of kindness and mercy. Even if you disagree with Martlet forgiving you, even if you think she's stupid to trust you after all you've done, she is still willing to give you another chance. That's how you earn the title Zenith of Monster Kind. It's by showing off how kind of a species they really are. But if you continue down the genocide route, fighting her and besting her, she'll make a tactical retreat, which I think shows that she isn't some stereotypically stupid bird brain who can't think ahead. If you put her in a serious enough situation, she will put in the required thought and make the best decision she can come up with. And later on, she'll make another attempt at reasoning with you, at empathizing with you, doing everything she can to make you understand that this isn't necessary and that you, Clover, don't have the full picture. Despite knowing that you can kick her butt, despite knowing that you've kept on killing monsters, and despite knowing how determined you are, she still tries to make a play at reason. This girl does absolutely everything she can to save lives, including your own. Saying that you're lucky she found you and not one of the other royal guards, I don't think that's a barely disguised threat. I think she's telling you to your face that stopping now is your only chance at surviving this whole ordeal. Even when Clover pulls out his gun, she doesn't immediately fight him or run away. She says that she didn't want it to come to this. Martlet doesn't want you to die, she doesn't want monsters to die, she just wants peace and happiness for all involved. And then you have the final confrontation, where Martlet is both at her highest and her lowest point. And I say both highest and lowest because I think a lot of her mentality here is very similar to Clover's. Think about it. At this point, Martlet believes that she is doing the just thing. She says that any goodness you have is 6 feet under, and she's willing to inject determination into herself just for the chance to beat you. So many of her lines in this pre-fight dialogue sound like something Clover would say were the situations reversed. Clover believes that there is no redeeming qualities to monster kind, that they're all just that, monsters. And Martlet is thinking the same thing here. Both Clover and Martlet have been radicalized into fighting to protect and avenge their own kind. Way earlier in the video, I talk about corrupting Martlet to have those same bitter feelings as Clover does in the Genocide route. And this is exactly what I mean. And yet another reason why I love Martlet so much. She is so far south of perfect, and while what I think she's feeling here is absolutely justified, it really is just a mirror to what Clover's thinking. I can't really say that one person has more moral superiority than the other one. Both are fighting with determination, hatred, and an incredibly high level of violence, and it's because they're pissed off. Clover and Martlet are absolutely fuming here. They're both extremely dedicated to absolutely decimating the other one, because both of them believe that they are right. And while I personally understand Martlet's side way more than Clover's, I think that if you take all personal feelings out of it, it's really hard to claim that one is better than the other here. Now, this final fight has some banger music, but it goes further than just sounding cool. There's a lot of messaging and what I would call secret storytelling that's hidden away in the music. A good way of unraveling this secret storytelling is by looking at Martlet's leitmotif, or leitmotif, whichever one it is. But what is a leitmotif? Well, prepare to be educated. A leitmotif is a recurrent theme throughout a musical or literary composition, associated with a particular person, idea, or situation. Now, to make all that fancy gobbledygook sound simple, in almost all of Martlet's tracks, a specific series of notes play, and it sounds something like this. These notes in this order are what you would call Martlet's leitmotif, because it plays in almost all of her songs and it signifies her appearance. I'm gonna play some different songs that have her leitmotif one after another. Listen really closely for those repeating notes. That is what Martlet's leitmotif is. Now, the first time we meet Martlet, when she's calibrating her puzzle, a really simple but cheery sounding song is playing, and its most prominent notes are that leitmotif we mentioned earlier. Listen really closely for the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I really like this scene because it introduces us to Martlet in a really clear way. First and foremost, we see that she's recalibrating the puzzles, and she also has this guidebook in her hand, immediately giving you the idea that Martlet is doing this as a job rather than a hobby. Maybe she's a royal guard, maybe she's a contractor of some sort. You don't know for sure, but you probably have a few guesses. This scene also tells us how she's not the best at what she does, and she isn't very careful at it. When she hears it crack, she says that it should hold together for a few uses at least. And we see this kinda nervous, sweaty looking sprite to the left, while at the same time, this song is constantly playing. This song is super light, it feels kinda Christmassy, and it's a happy little beat. But it also plays the leitmotif a few times in it, while using really airy instruments, giving this song that lighthearted, spirited feeling. Sorry, I don't really know how you're supposed to officially describe music, but hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down. My ultimate point is that this scene, and more importantly, this theme, do a really good job at establishing Martlet's character, and the events that play after continue to flesh her out. Now, when you're doing the first fight with Martlet, I think the two themes that you hear, depending on what route you're doing, do an amazing job at showing you where Martlet's head is at. They are Protocol and Apprehension. Protocol is for pacifist and neutral runs, while Apprehension is for Genocide. Starting with Protocol, I think it does an amazing job at giving you insight into Martlet's character. There is a talk dialogue you can have with her in the dunes, where she'll talk about how when monsters fight, there is this melodic vibration that emanates from them. And what Martlet is talking about is the music you hear during boss fights. It's their actual essence creating tonal vibrations in the air. They're a boombox, pretty much, is what she's getting at. But Martlet says herself that she isn't sure that her music quite fits her, since it's kind of intense and she's not that intense of a person. Now, I think this is really interesting because I was actually thinking the same thing when I was first writing the script for this video. In the pacifist fight, she's really unsure of herself. She's constantly flipping through her manual, and she ends the fight with just giving up and breaking the rules. But I think with how stressed out Martlet is during this entire encounter, it makes sense for the song to be the way it is. Protocol is a decently intense song, but there are a few of these more peaceful parts in it. Here's an intense part. And here's a softer, more peaceful part. Having this song flip-flop between these two kind of opposite states of emotion show how confused Martlet is. Put yourself in Martlet's shoes for a second. Right in front of you is a human, a creature whose death is instrumental in your freedom, a creature who's supposed to be violent and dangerous, a creature that has a whole guidebook put together on how to best capture them. But it's the pacifist version of Clover. You aren't ever hit by the kid, and when you try and get him to insult you, he just calls you a meanie, which isn't threatening in the slightest. The kid is just chill, and kinda hangs out and plays along with whatever you ask him to do. It makes sense that you'd be really conflicted about what to do, which is why the song has both intense moments and peaceful moments. I really like the instruments used too. They're such soft sounds and it perfectly fits Martlet's character. Like, throwing all symbolism away, having these really gentle instruments clash together while you're watching Martlet be a total girl failure does a really good job at endearing you to her. And, again, it fleshes her out more and more as a character. Or should I say, it feathers her out, you know, right? Now, the Genocide variation of this fight has Apprehension as its theme, and I cannot stress enough how much I adore it. This song is filled to the brim with metaphors and symbolism and all that juicy stuff. First of all, it uses a lot of the same instruments as Protocol, soft, delicate sounding notes and noises that are this time overtaken by this electric guitar sounding thing. I don't really know instruments, but you know what I'm talking about. Listen to what you're hearing. This song is still very much a Martlet theme, but listen to how much more intense it is right off the bat, and that makes sense. This song still has somewhat peaceful lulls in it, along with the same leitmotif we mentioned earlier, but this time everything feels so much more cramped, almost like each instrument is fighting to be heard more than the others. Which makes sense considering the nature of the situation. The big disaster that Martlet has been preparing and evacuating for is finally here. Face to face, trying to kill her, and to her complete surprise, it's a child. The first 53 or so seconds of the song captures that feeling really well. The leitmotif that we've heard a bunch of times now doesn't sound cheery and peaceful anymore. It sounds like an alarm that's blaring in Martlet's ears, telling her that she is in an incredibly dangerous situation. And then the song slows down a bit. We get this quiet, somewhat somber sounding series of notes that is quickly followed by the same instruments we heard before, but they sound a lot more organized now. I think this represents Martlet's thoughts as the fight progresses. At first, it was shock, alarm, and fear at how insane this entire situation is. And then it slows down a little. As she gathers her thoughts, the music follows. It's slower, but still intense. And it's slowly building up more and more towards a realization. And then boom, it hits. Everything kicks off again, and we get this beautiful guitar solo, followed by an equally intense harpist chord, I think is how you say it. And then we're right back to the alarm-like leitmotif. And then the song goes through this cycle again and again. This quiet lull, the build-up, and then another explosive round of guitar solos. Seriously, this song does an amazing job at telling you Martlet's feelings. If Martlet herself said that the music is a tonal representation of how she's feeling, then 1, my explanation makes a ton of sense, and I'm a goddamn genius. And 2, the writers knew what they were doing when designing this track. Like, seriously, I cannot sing the praises of the people who made this game enough. You all did an amazing job at using music to establish a character, but you made it complex enough to the point where you really have to think about it, which is like my favorite thing to do. Okay, so the next set of tracks I want to talk about are Remedy and Retribution, both of which played during Martlet's final fight in the Genocide route. I don't have a whole lot to say about Remedy metaphorically. While the other two I talked about, I had lots and lots of theories and ideas as to how they represented what Martlet is thinking. Remedy does still follow some of that logic, but it's a lot simpler. In both the song and the fight, there is no hesitation. Right now, Martlet has fully dedicated herself to stopping you, no matter what it takes. Unlike Apprehension, there are no lulls in the song, no quiet moments, or anything that could be interpreted as hesitation. This song is purely triumphant, bossy, and loud. Martlet's leitmotif is also heard here, though it's not nearly as noticeable or obvious as the others, and I think that's because it doesn't have the same instruments as the others. I mean, maybe it does, technically. Again, I'm not like musically educated, but the song sounds completely different compared to the previous ones. It doesn't have any of those soft noises you heard before, because Martlet has nothing to be soft about. At this point, she's out for blood. I do think that while the song does sound brash and violent, there are a few very quick, very short moments that sound kinda somber. Like Martlet is sad that she let things get this far. Like how she realizes that she's not surviving the determination serum, or maybe she's just disappointed in herself for not stopping you sooner. We saw earlier that Martlet has some major self-confidence issues, and while she can step up and do what needs to be done, I doubt that's done with a perfect, dedicated mindset. As strong and powerful as Martlet is right now, it makes sense that she'd be feeling a lot of regrets, but those parts of the song don't last long. It quickly defaults back to being angry, quick, and loud, because regret isn't going to win the fight against Clover. Determination and anger will. Now, Retribution. This is easily my favorite track in the game. It truly does feel like the complete culmination of everything the Genocide route embodies. First of all, I don't think Retribution is solely Martlet's theme, which seems odd. Who else could this be for? It is her fight after all, but at this point, I don't think that's really true. In the previous phase of the fight, while Remedy was playing, Martlet was in complete control. She was flying above you, she locked up your fight button, and you couldn't do any actual damage to her. It was only her little chest piece thing that you could harm, but once you break it, everything opens up and Martlet falls down. At this point, you are both on an equal playing field. Neither Clover nor Martlet have any type of superiority over the other, and I mean that in every possible way. Physically, you're eye to eye with each other. Both sides are consistently taking damage and doing everything in their power to take the other down. And in terms of who's in the moral right, I think it's neither of them. Like I said earlier, both you and Martlet are completely wrapped up in this idea of getting justice. Both of you are out for blood. Both sides only have one goal right now, and it's to annihilate the other. So when you ask, then whose song is this? It's both of theirs. It's a duet. They're both contributing to the tonal vibrations in the air, or whatever it is that creates the music. Martlet's leitmotif is nowhere to be found here, but do you know whose leitmotif does make an appearance? Clover's. Clover's leitmotif, which I'll play really quick, is the more prominent notes played in enemy retreating. You know, that song that plays as you slaughter more and more monsters, all for some BS idea of justice? That's the motif that shows up. Martlet's is gone because she has lost her way, but it still sounds a lot like a Martlet song. If you compare Retribution to Protocol, it does have some really similar sounding instruments being used. And that's because it's Martlet's instruments that are playing to Clover's tune. AKA, it's Martlet being corrupted into following the same ideals as Clover. This song is not exclusive to one character or the other. It's a culmination of how they're both feeling. Retribution sounds so damn triumphant because both sides of this fight wholly believe that they are 100% morally correct. Both sides are so entrenched in their views that they cannot see themselves as anything other than the hero of the story, making their final stand against the evil they've been forced to fight against. The funny thing is that after Martlet, Clover only kills one other monster, and it's Asgore, who no matter what would have tried to kill Clover. Martlet didn't have to follow through on this fight. She could have just let Clover go and stopped the cycle of vengeance that's disguised itself as justice. But she decides to fight Clover anyways because it's not really about justice anymore. It's not about doing what's right or saving the souls of whatever and whoever. At this point, it doesn't really matter who wins because the lives are lost regardless. One life would be saved by Martlet winning, and that's the life of someone who's already killed a handful of children. That's a life that some would argue should be ended. The irony of this fight is so incredible because it's ultimately pointless. You can't bring back the people who have died, and Martlet, regardless of if she wins or if she loses, would die at the end anyways. And what does Clover get? He liberates 5 human souls from cages, only for them to go and dissipate somewhere in the real world? Or does he go back to his maybe abusive folks just to continue living out whatever life he had before? The resolution to this fight is non-existent. Nobody wins no matter what happens. That's the beautiful irony of retribution. Retribution is just a fancy word for revenge. There is no justice to be had here. At this point in the game, nothing you're doing is just, and nothing Martlet's doing is just. It's just tit for tat, murder for murder, revenge for revenge. That's the real message behind retribution. It's a fancy, justice-like sounding word, but it ultimately is a lie. The song sounds amazing. It sounds like the hero's anthem, but it isn't. It's just a lie, a way to inspire you into feeling like you're really achieving something other than senseless violence. But anyways, I really like Martlet's character, in case you couldn't tell. I adore her writing and her personality. It's just a lot of fun, but I think where a lot of that love comes from is from relatability and admiration. I said earlier that Martlet seems the most real, and maybe that's just me thinking that, but I saw a lot of similarities to myself in Martlet. I very much like ranting, which is surprising, I know, and I've always had the same kind of getting sidetracked too easily problems that Martlet seems to have. I think most of the time when we're finding characters that we like or respect, it's ones who seem similar to us, or characters that we want to be. And I'll be 100% honest here, I would like to be more like Martlet in some ways. Not everything about her is a positive, but that's part of what makes her so genuine. Still, I respect characters who can get serious and take charge when it's necessary. And you don't see a lot of characters like Martlet take these actions. In the Pacifist route, she wants you to insult her, and the second insult you throw at her makes fun of her clothes, and she pretends to brush it off, but really quickly you see that she's insecure about your comment. Little moments like this really humanize Martlet, and it gives her that extra layer of realness that makes me adore her character. Between this, her little freak out following the boat ride, and how she's generally disorganized as a person, it makes her such a fun character to watch, and it shows how capable she really is when she steps up in the Genocide route, which I've already yapped about. But I started this entire chapter off with saying that Martlet is the zenith of the underground, and that's because she is the kindest, most considerate, and down-to-earth monster that the underground has to offer. But even she isn't immune to the terrible repercussions and corruption that a genocide run can bring. She's not the zenith because of some grand hero complex or because she's taken a huge weight on her shoulders. She's the zenith because she represents everything that monsters are. A species that is simply doing the best they can with what little they've been given. And that's the video. I really hope you enjoyed watching. I adore Undertale Yellow, and I'm pretty happy with how this video turned out. There are a few things I didn't really mention that I would have liked to, but it wouldn't be worth making a whole nother chapter about it. So I want to rapid fire some of the things I really liked about the game, but didn't dedicate a whole segment to.
Point number 1.
The sprite art is absolutely beautiful. So many times we see these amazing animations and character designs, and the way this game blends together so many different styles both establishes how diverse the underground really is, and also provides some amazing eye candy. Martlet's transformation, Ceroba's super cool magical attack thing, and literally all of the Flowey fight. This is some of the best sprite art I've seen in a while, and major kudos to the game developers for managing to make it look so nice.
Point number 2.
I adore how much more mature the game feels compared to the first one. I think the writers realized how much older the OG Undertale fans would be by the time this game came out, and they upped the maturity of this game to compensate for that. Undertale Yellow has a lot of really heavy-handed themes, and while I've already talked and ranted about what those themes are, I really adore how well they were written.
Point number 3
is actually a complaint. This fight is way too difficult. I had so much trouble with this fight compared to the other hard ones, quote-unquote, that came before this, and I actually ended up cheating my way through this fight. You can see right here that I'm only taking 1 damage per hit. But what I think happened is that they took this concept of a genocide fight being super duper difficult, like Sans, you know, way too far. There is way too many attacks going on screen all at once during some parts. And these claw attacks felt completely undodgeable. I know they are dodgeable, but they didn't feel like it. All the other difficult fights I was able to clear after an hour or two, but after about 3 hours of not being able to beat the first phase of the Martlet fight, I promptly decided that this was ridiculously difficult, and for the sake of not smashing my keyboard in, I decided to cheat through it. I'm willing to accept that this is completely a skill issue. That's mean. I don't mean it like that, but still, I just really wanted to address this really quickly because it is my only complaint with the game, but I don't know. It was enough to make me not enjoy playing through this fight, just the sheer difficulty of it. Anyways, that's it. Video's over. I have nothing else to add, no more stuff to rant about, no more birds to simp over. The video's all wrapped up now. Seriously though, this video was a blast to make. If you made it this far, then thank you. Genuinely thank you for watching the whole thing, giving it the time of day. It does genuinely mean the world to me. If you think this video is deserving of it, then please feel free to show it some support. Leave a like, comment, download it to VHS, and keep it in a nuclear bunker. That way when the world ends, you'll have something entertaining to watch. But no, seriously, thank you for watching. I would really like to see comments that either agree with me, disagree with me, or just comments in general. I think there could be a lot of good discussion in the comments below, and I'll do my best to contribute to that. So, you know, if you have a counterpoint, then say it. I'd love to talk about it with you. But that's it. I don't know how you're supposed to end these, so bye, I guess.